Today, we have a very special guest, Eugene, an Australian fitness educator and the creator of the Gambaroo Method. His innovative app features elite coaches who emphasize moving better and becoming the jack of all trades, evolving beyond pure bodybuilding, giving you more training options with sustainable progress for life. With 15 years of experience in the fitness industry and being a former competitive bodybuilder, Eugene has conducted workshops worldwide and built a loyal following of over 900,000 subscribers on YouTube. He is a wealth of knowledge and has personally helped my journey, sharing high-level information that you will clearly see today. Eugene explains how to train smarter and push beyond conventional fitness boundaries, taking the best from multiple disciplines. Get ready for some deep, nerdy nuances. You're going to learn so much.
Man, I appreciate it. Like you say, you've been watching me for a while, since maybe 2020, so when I first started, but I can't even remember when I first came across your videos, back in the Alpha Destiny days. I'm a long-time lurker. I consider myself very new to the game of YouTube still, despite, being 4 years into it or so. I'm a patron, more than a creator. I've been a trainer since 2009. I've been creating content since around 2011. Like it started out on Facebook, doing blog posts. It was just a lot of just walls of text, writing. That was a medium back then. And then it became Instagram, but same deal. It was Instagram, just photos and text. And then eventually it became 15-second videos, which was just training clips. And it just slowly evolved. Whatever avenues get shown to me as different ways to create content, if I like it, I'm going to do it that way, just to reach people in a way that I like to communicate and that they like to consume information. But it's been a long time when I timeline it out that way.
15 years in the industry. And you've also worked with some of the best coaches as well. I've seen you with John Meadows, hypertrophy coach, Dr. Mike Israetel. How has your experience been working with those guys?
Yeah, it's been, that's easily the biggest perk about content creation, in my opinion, about what you do. I hope this doesn't get taken the wrong way, but you're kind of a nobody until you have a following. Please don't cut that up and make that the calling card for this podcast because I'll get crucified.
No worries.
But I know 100% that a lot of the opportunities I've had passed upon me with being able to work with people like Mike or whatever, it's literally because I have a following and I have a brand. It's because I'm somebody in the pure vanity metrics of saying, oh, you have a lot of subscribers or you have a lot of followers. Simple as that. People look at you differently. People treat you differently, for better or worse, because there is a bad side to that as well. But it's opened up so many doors. And I got to say, out of all those doors, I don't want to say, I don't want to put this in the wrong way where, I don't mean to say that Mike Israetel is non-genuine, but the first genuine experience I ever had was with John Meadows, because that was when I had no following. That was literally when I had nothing. And I messaged him out of the blue, emailed him saying, hey, I'd love to bring you out to Australia to just learn from you and work with you. And he opened a lot of doors for me in terms of just offering that and being like, I believe in you, Eugene. I like what you're about, just having conversations like this with me. And it really went somewhere. Whereas somebody like Mike Israetel, who I love, and I think it's we have a really good, genuine friendship there as well. But it started because he didn't reach out to me, but his marketing team did. And they were like, hey, you got a big following. Would you like to do some collaborations? And when I first met Mike, he had no idea who I was, which is totally fair enough. And that's why I think, I don't want this to be taken the wrong way of me saying, oh, Mike reached out to me just for clout and just for social media fame. It was, we've had so many very genuine interactions. I consider him a really good friend, somebody I have so much respect for.
And just to cut you off on that point, when you did collaborate with Mike for the first time, he hadn't exploded yet. So I want people to put that into perspective. It's a recent thing in the last year and a half or so, where his channel has reached the amount of followers it is now. So he really wasn't too far off from you. You were still on a similar page. Not that he was trying to take advantage or anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was the same thing with me. So I know what you're saying, but sometimes the internet can take things out of hand, Of course.
But I think it's worth having the conversation around it because this is the day of collabs and we're doing a collab right now. And the unfortunate sense of it is a lot of people won't look at you or take you as seriously until you have a following, which I think is misguided because there are so many fantastic coaches, so many fantastic people to learn from and collaborate with who have nothing to offer you in terms of social media clout. But you shouldn't be disregarding them because of that. Some of the best minds I've learned from aren't on social media. Like my most foundational bodybuilding coach through a lot of my years, he's a hermit. He's just off social media. He won't let you take a photo of him. That's how secluded and secretive he kind of is, just for his most anonymity. And I think that's cool. It's fair enough.
Yes. Like I said before, behind the scenes, there's a lot of dedicated lifters out there who are putting in the work, and you don't hear about them until literally a decade later when, say, they are in their 30s and they have this background of coaching and whatnot. So we need to give those people the opportunity if we see the potential. Now, if they're just trying to make a quick buck and then they're going to leave, the thing is, you can kind of detect that when you've been in this industry for long enough. But when you see someone who has genuine appreciation for the game and they just want to have a conversation with you, then give them the benefit of the doubt. And in my experience of doing that, what we call the noble natty community has expanded. Once upon a time, I felt like I was all alone. But now I have this circle around me of guys who I believed in, and some of them have actually surpassed my physique in certain respects. So when you see that potential, it's a beautiful thing, and we should all be uplifting one another, because you never know. One conversation can change a life, yours and everyone around you, and it becomes this trickling effect. And that's what I went through years ago with working with guys like Omar Issoff, Scott Herman, and even Jeff Nipper before he blew up. So you remember these experiences.
Yes, absolutely. 'Cause it is all about, as much as we love lifting weights and getting jacked, the bigger picture behind it all, not to get all wishy-washy too early, but it's connection. We're all here by a unified experience of enjoying improvement, and that's it. It's got to be shared.
100%. And what you realize is that the fitness industry is kind of small in the grand scheme of things. Everyone knows each other. I'm sure you've gone to expos or when you've done your seminars, it's kind of the same clique of people you run into.
It's always surprising. Like, you think there's such big dramas and stuff going on, and then you realize how small our bubble really is, and how what we do in this space has very little impact on on the real world, I guess, on the outside world. And it's very easy to get caught up. Like, I get caught up all the time in my own training, in my own even business and work, and realize, hang on, what's really important here? What's really impactful? And a lot of the daily stress that I have around my own workouts or my physique or whatever, like this is small shit. This is small stuff.
And actually that goes to the topic of body dysmorphia, which I want to discuss later. But bring it back to yourself, Eugene. Who exactly are you? And what is your training background? Where did you start and how did you end up where you are right now, besides coaching people in real life? So I'm talking about your actual training and goals, because you used to compete in bodybuilding. So there's a story there. Can you run me through that?
Yeah. The best way to sort of segment me, as people might like to, is to say bodybuilding is my pure background. Like, I grew up, my formative years of training, it was focused purely on getting as big as possible. Dealing with a lot of body dysmorphia back then. And I still see slivers of it nowadays as well. But it was purely from the love of saying, I want to build as much muscle as I can, and I want to devote my entire life to this. Like, this was when I was 16, 17 years old, when I started to learn what bodybuilding, before I even knew what bodybuilding was. I just knew that I was a small, diminutive person. I wanted to get bigger. I wanted to gain that respect and have that strength about myself, that confidence. And bodybuilding became the thing. And then it became something I never expected. You know, bodybuilding became something that I thought was going to be my savior, was going to be something that would then give me access to a certain level of respect, confidence, achievement. And it started to take a really dangerous hold on me. And it became a very obsessive thing for several years. And I love the training. You know, I look back at it and I still say some of the training back then, it was so fun or so formative to my development now. But I'll also look back at it and say, I wish I could have had better role models and people steering me in the right direction to be able to channel my intensity appropriately. But in terms of training, I've always had a very varied approach. I mean, now you look at the last couple of years, we have some very clear-cut rules on bodybuilding. Even 10 years ago, we had some pretty clear-cut rules on how you should be looking at training, because like Brad Schoenfeld put his paper on muscle damage, mechanical tension, metabolic stress. Those are like the big things we're thinking, okay, these are the keys to hypertrophy. But you go back just 11 years instead of 10 years. You go back around 2010 to 2015, that's when a lot of us were sort of coming up and we were really getting into our training. So we were in our like late teens, early 20s, and we're making a lot of these gains. And a lot of it is just from pure experimentation and trying out so many different modalities. Trying like, you know, as a bodybuilder, I was doing a lot of pure strength work. You know, when I was competing as a bodybuilder, 2 weeks out on my final contest, I was doing 10 sets of 2 heavy squats. Like wow. I was trying to get as strong as I could to be retentive for muscle. It was power building before power building was really a thing. It was just because it made sense of like mechanical tension, strength. I want to get strong. I want to get big. Let's do it all at once. How do I taper it so I don't completely bust every joint in my body before I compete? And it was also like, okay, what other modalities can have a lot of benefits as well? maybe gymnastics, calisthenics, from a movement perspective, from a joint perspective. Like, I don't take my muscles, no matter how much full ROM stuff I do, there is nothing quite like hitting a set of pelican curls for the extreme stretch on your shoulder extensors in your chest. You can do the laid back preacher curl, you can do the Mike Israel new laid back curl. It's fantastic. I love that stuff. But until you've experienced the body control, the awareness, and the just extreme tension you're putting your body under with gymnastics, it's like, that's a whole different game of joint strength. And that's what interested me back then. Interests me now to this day as well. As much as I love the science, the optimal way of training for hypertrophy, I think it's still limited. And people have gotten hyper-focused on the one thing and forgotten that we're a human organism who's got more than just muscle to deal with here.
What you're saying right now, Eugene, is everything that I stand for. I couldn't agree more. Your first love was bodybuilding, right? But if we really examine that word, you're building everything that the body has to offer.
Yes.
Calisthenics teaches you how to move your body through space in a way that weight training simply can't replicate in certain respects. And when you're talking about the pelican curl, that blasts the biceps in the lengthened position, which guys like Daniel Vadnal have been promoting for at least a decade now. Way to stretch, a good resistance profile, very difficult without having to load it. The science is catching up with what we knew worked all along as it pertains to some of these hardcore exercises. The only limitation, quote unquote, we could say would maybe be the stability aspect. And I do want to hear your opinion on that. But the alignment, the progression potential, there's a lot of things that we're starting to realize actually were somewhat optimal, or at least can be incredibly effective when compared to some of these newer alternatives. So yes. I do want to ask you about that later. So you basically compete in bodybuilding, you loved it, and then you realized there were all these other things that were mixed in it. So then I get this sense that you like old school training and new school training. How do you best go about blending the two?
Yeah, very much. Like that's a good summation. Like, I love the old school stuff. Again, like my most formative coach, he was heavily influenced by like the Vince Gironda, John Grimmick, the old school gold and silver era lifters, and it showed a lot in some of the quirky shit that I ended up doing in my training, and a lot of what I still do today. In terms of how to blend old and new, I try to avoid labeling things as old and new. And I start looking at it more just purely as exercises. To use that cliche, everything that you can do in or out of the gym to train, to build your body, they're all different tools. And the application of those tools will come down to your personal context based on like the optimality on things like resistance profile, stability, skill acquisition, but also your personal preference and enjoyment. And it's also understanding that like there is never going to be one unified approach on how to build muscle on the best absolute way because of how varied we are as humans. You know, there's going to be so much going on where, yeah, like I've seen incredible progress doing just pure powerlifting based work in terms of building pure muscle size. But I would be very hesitant to advise that to most people until they get a certain degree of skill under their belt. Same for the gymnastic stuff as well.
Sure.
But in terms of blending it, I say every exercise, say let's take the pelican curl as an example. That is an exercise that requires a lot of skill, requires a lot of stability. And it takes a lot of time to master that compared to, say, an incline curl. What extra benefits are there from the joint perspective? There's probably a lot more than a pure incline curl would be. And then I'll just say, okay, down to the individual now, you need to do an exercise that trains your biceps. Which one of these makes more sense based on not just your personal preference, but also like where you're currently at, what's going to give you the most bang for your buck? How is your mobility? Is it worth you spending maybe the 12 weeks it may take for you to completely master and really feel out this movement and start making really good progress on it? And I think, you know what? For a lot of more advanced people, I think it is worth doing that kind of thing because they've probably been neglecting that for so long. But you could also make the exact same opposite argument and say, well, for the more advanced individual, they should be specializing on their pure goal of hypertrophy. They shouldn't be wasting their time 12 weeks learning one exercise. Screw that. You got gains to make. And this is where I can present you with all the arguments for and against for the tool.
Sure.
And then the person's got to say, I've got space in my program right now for 2 curl movements for my biceps. What do I then want to choose? And that's how I look at it. I try to leave as much as down to it to the individual. That's why I'll create a lot of content I do the way that I do is I say, here are the options. Here's how it works. It's a lot less sexy and sellable as me saying, you must do this or you'll die. But that's the best way I've been able to navigate trying to blend this stuff into people's training. Because I don't want it to be seen as bodybuilding. I want it to be seen as, in its purest sense, your whole body is being built. You need to decide for yourself, where are the deficits? And how can gymnastics or anything else come into play to help to fix those deficits for you?
Would you say then that your core training philosophy is hybrid bodybuilding?
Yeah, as much as I don't like using that term, although I use it a lot.
I know it's become more popular in recent years, the word hybrid.
Yeah, I think it is the perfect way to describe things, because I would never want to put out, I wouldn't expect anybody to see my programming and my training and say, the way that Eugene trains is pure bodybuilding. It's not. Mike Israel can poke so many holes into it. Jeff Nippard can poke, so I can poke so many holes into it and say, this is not pure bodybuilding. There are better things to be doing. Like, why are you doing plyometrics? Why are you doing a lot of sprint work? Why are you doing gymnastics? There are better options. 100% there are better options. But while my main goal is, physique, I also want to cover as many different avenues of human development as possible. I want power. I want speed. I want coordination, balance. Some of these simple qualities that the industry has forgotten about and have sort of been pushed off to the side as circus tricks or as something more for sport-specific contexts, because bodybuilding is easy to latch onto as a thing for the gen pop. Like, hey, build muscle, the end. This is what builds the best body, you should do it as well. It's like, well, people actually don't actually want that. Working with real humans, you realize that most people don't want to look like Ronnie Coleman. Even if they say want to get jacked, doing what the best bodybuilders do isn't always the best approach. Even like a guy like C-Bum, you don't do what they do just because they've got a fantastic physique that you want to look like. Take elements, take heavy influence from it, but don't copy, because I guarantee you got very different goals. Even if your goal is pure bodybuilding, there are some very different things going on here.
You're taking the best elements of each niche.
That's what it is.
And by having access to different exercise variety, it allows you to make progress in a way that never gets stale. And you're training something else that is not just going to get you bigger, because we can all just take the easy way out, like you said, and potentially just focus on pure hypertrophy. That's the sole goal. We're just going to do the most stable, optimal machine, keep our exercise selection rather limited, but then you'll be missing out on all these qualities, which, if you're really honest with yourself, maybe you do care about them to a certain extent. I think we all want to be a little bit more mobile, have the healthiest joints, be able to do cool stuff in the gym and outside. Not that we're so dependent on one modality of training.
Of course.
At least that's what I believe when it comes to the average lifter.
100% agree. Again, I see a lot, maybe it's my own bias as well, so I do want to own that, but I see so much of a heavy influence of bodybuilding on the industry and people thinking that's the one thing. And then when you really think about it, I mean, how many people who follow you or subscribe to your channel, for example, on YouTube, do you think are pure bodybuilding enthusiasts? They're health enthusiasts, they're training, lifting enthusiasts, but they're not the pure muscle enthusiasts. Even a guy like it was revealing to me when Jeff Nippard put out a poll maybe 12 months ago asking how many people are actively in the industry who follow his channel. How many people do you think who are subscribed to you? What percentage do you think are actively professionals in the industry?
I would say it's a very small percentage.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you exactly how much.
I think for Jeff was something like maybe 10% or so. And that shocked me. I would have suspected, my bias personally being like heavy in the education field to begin with, there'd be a lot of professionals who'd follow me. I was like, oh, it's actually a lot of but a lot of gen pop people from many different backgrounds. People who care about the nerdy stuff and who want optimal here and there, but actually don't have the extreme optimal goals. When you look at it from that perspective, it's like, wow, why are we catering so much to the pure optimal all the time, when the reality of the situation is people need a more balanced approach? And the other side to this as well, the further argument of this is, even when I cared purely about bodybuilding, like I still care so much about building as much muscle as I humanly can. I want to get as strong as I humanly possibly can. But I also know that I don't want that in 12 weeks. I don't want that in 12 months. I want that beyond 12 years. I'm going to be lifting till I'm 80, if I live that long.
That's right.
I'm going to be lifting forever. And it's very hard, even for me now, to be able to see with that much foresight of like what's really ahead of me. But if you look at, again, just come back to the simple example of using so far the pelican curl, you might look at that and say, oh, it's going to take me 12 weeks to learn it properly, which is realistic given how unstable it could be and how much tissue, tendon adaptation has to occur. It could be 12, it could be a few months to get used to it, to actually really be able to squeeze as much as you can out of it. That's way too long. I'm not going to waste the time on that bullshit. But man, if you got 12 years, if you got 20 years ahead of you,
exactly,
what's that going to unlock for you? Not that you have to do pelican curls for the rest of your life, but if you spent that time just doing that as basic, low-level accessory, just for a few months, just to learn it. Now you've opened up a whole new world that's going to give you so much more for the rest of your life. And that's how I really try to look at training now for people.
I think that that's what the average lifter doesn't realize. They're not just going to be doing this for the next 2 to 5 years. Why would you start training at 16 to 20 to stop at, say, 25? You're going to be doing this in your 40s, 50s, and 60s. You want to lift forever, in good health, right? So all these things go together. And at some point, you will put on so much muscle that the rate of progress is painfully slow. What else are you going to do? If there's all these other untapped areas, I think you're going to be very tempted to fulfill that. And you know what? Like you said, 12 weeks versus 12 years, it's not a big deal. And that, again, goes back to the idea of skill acquisition not necessarily being an issue in the context of hypertrophy. Like nowadays, there's a lot of talk against old school movements, like, say, the flat barbell bench press or even the dumbbell bench press, that they're not optimal because they're unstable, or even the Bulgarian split squat. Avoid unilateral work. You must be locked in to avoid a tornado of sorts. Every parameter for hypertrophy, which is true on paper, has been taken to the extreme. And now that things that are probably just as good, maybe a tad bit less effective, on paper, are being just thrown out. So you're leaving out all these tools that could potentially enhance your training and give you more things to shoot for in the long term, because it's a long journey. And if you're going to narrow yourself out like that for 10 plus years, I think a lot of guys are going to quit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is, without sounding like an old man yelling at sky, but this is part of the TikTokification of fitness, where we've had this explosion of new creators who parrot a lot of really good information. Like I would say, you know what? Hey, picking maybe a machine press is a better choice for a lot of people's goals versus a dumbbell or a barbell because of the stability. But when you and I might explain that, we're giving a lot of context. So we've given a 10, 20 minutes YouTube video saying, here are the reasons why. But now in the last 5 years alone, that content has become so short form and so hyper-focused, and the algorithms have changed. And this influx of new creators have latched onto these certain ideals. And it's hard to sift through the noise anymore, where the one message is now, oh, stability is good, other things are bad. And even Alex has said that. Even Eugene said that in the past. I said stability is bad. Like I've got videos where I talk about, hey, you know what? I wouldn't pick barbell exercise for a lot of people because of these reasons of stability or joints or whatever it might be. But I say in that video, I still use them.
It's all context. That's the problem, Eugene. It's not that you're trying to confuse your audience. It's that you're speaking about this one thing, and people are just grabbing snippets. And I think that without looking at like true long form content, you're never going to absorb all that, and you're just going to regurgitate what you saw on TikTok or Instagram Reels. And that's why it's like when I get these comments, and I'm sure you do too, you know where they're getting the information. It's quite obvious. And it's always the same comment, like a copy paste, because no one took the time to learn the nuances and the application to those certain exercises and goals.
Yes.
That said, so you're incorporating, I see you doing Zercher lifts, a lot of extended range of motion. You still do your barbell stuff, but I also see some N1 education exercises. So when did you discover the work of Kasim Hansen, and how has certain exercises impacted your training and even people you coach with?
This is going back in my history a little bit, but between the years of around 2015, maybe 2014 to around 2020, so that 5-6 year period when I was just getting out of bodybuilding, I was doing a lot of touring around the world teaching biomechanics, teaching setups, teaching stability, teaching bracing, all this stuff around optimal, inverted commas, biomechanics. And at that period of time, it was Kasim and me who were the two main people doing these kinds of events and education. I've known Kasim throughout the industry for several years before that. You know, when he was working with Ben Pakulski way back then, before even the MI40 gym days. And he's always been someone I've really respected. You know, we share a lot of the same principles and a lot of the same learning backgrounds. He's obviously taken it a lot further than I have in terms of his education and his development in that aspect. But it was probably, I know, it must have been like 2020 or so, in the midst of one of my tours, I started seeing him posting a lot of hate stuff about me. Literally, like he was saying, I don't want to misquote, but he was putting out a lot of content. Not a lot, but he was putting out some content where he was actively calling out what I was teaching, what I was doing, saying this is wrong, this is bad, and this is negligent, this is going to cause injury, etc., etc. And I was like, hey, this is not cool. Like I never interacted with you. And he'd blocked me as well. And I was like, why have you blocked me? We've never spoken at all. So eventually I found out a way to reach out to him. And we got to talking. It's like, look, if you've got a problem with what I'm doing or who I am, or think I'm wrong about something, just let me know and we'll chat about it. So, I had a good chat about it. And I was wrong about several things. And he was very happy to help educate me on some of those ideas around sensation and pump-based training, and that helped to shift my views a little bit around that. And then he and I ended up meeting up, it would have been, 5 years ago or so. And he's been someone who I've always had a lot of respect for. I do like a lot of what he does, the way he explains things, the way he teaches things. It is out of a lot of people's level of understanding, and I like that he doesn't try to dumb things down. True. I like that he doesn't bend his way of teaching and his way of explaining things. He wants to make sure that he puts information out in the way that it needs to be served, and it will be consumed by the right people because of that. He's not trying to TikTok-fire things. He's trying to keep it as high level as possible to really engage with people. And, that's what really appeals to me as someone who's like, I'm a nerd with this kind of stuff. I love learning about this kind of stuff and trying to optimize these setups. And he's been very, very helpful with that.
That's very cool to hear. I didn't know that you had that background. I thought you maybe discovered each other a couple of years ago on social media and trying out his exercises.
Yeah, as you say, like the industry's small. People have a lot of the stuff goes back a lot further than people realize. I remember reading about Dr. Mike Israetel on John Meadows' membership site as a contributor before, when RP was just saying, before Dr. Mike really even had RP, he was just a college dude. Industry small.
Yeah. With John Meadows, I remember learning about him through Elite FTS, which was, of all things, through powerlifting information. He was the first bodybuilder using accommodating resistance on machines, and actually a lot of the optimal exercises we see today come from John. And especially he was talking about alignment before it was cool, with the dual rope push downs and doing brace curls on the lat pull down station. These exercises would come around 5 years later. So it's just interesting that, these things are coming and going, but there's always a source, right? Regarding the N1 exercises, in terms of the principles, like when we talk about leveraging the rib cage for the lats, having spinal flexion, how have you applied that to your back training? Is it just doing iliac pull downs, or is it also, do the rings play a role in that as well? Or are there certain calisthenics things you do, like certain principles? How have you applied it to other exercise in the gym?
Yeah, I would say one of the most, I think Kasim may end up seeing this and try to and think I'm misconstruing it, but I hope he doesn't see it that way. One of the most impactful things for me from looking at a lot of what Kasim does is understanding the function of a muscle is different to the textbook definition of what the muscle does. For example, the pec is an internal rotator, so it turns your arm in. But that doesn't mean that internally rotating your arm more is going to contract your pec more. There is going to be an ideal plane of motion position where the pec acts strongly as an internal rotator, and more is not always better. So a lot of what Kasim does is about optimizing the setup of the exercise to make sure before you've even started moving, your body is in the best possible position to use whatever target tissue it is, which is why you might not reach full shoulder flexion, like overhead, arm overhead, when you're doing a lat pull down, maybe if you're trying to specifically target a certain region. Because he's saying, yes, the lats do shoulder extension, bringing your arm from overhead down to by your side, but which division is most responsible for that in which degrees of that motion? Because the textbook definition just says lats move your arm from overhead down by your side. But the real nerdy, nuanced, and I would say more correct answer to that is the lats bring your arm from overhead to down by your side through a very specific range of motion, like through maybe half of the range of motion that we think it might be. So if you want to optimize your setup performance of gymnastic rings or pull downs or machine pull downs, whatever it is, to be able to hit that part of your lat, then you should be setting it up this way. And he has the best information around doing that. Now, how much of that is really necessary to be done, even for an advanced high-level bodybuilder, I'm not too sure. I'm yet to be convinced that there's going to be a lot of extra merit to that. Like from setting up more of an iliac pull down versus a slightly more thoracic bias pull down. If you were to just add on a significant amount of tissue over time, it's probably going to help. But I would say he has merits in saying that because it's in doing what he does, because my interpretation of it is that there are possibly going to be areas that you are under or overtraining because of how most machines and exercises are developed. Like we might be shortchanging our lat pull down, our lat strength, because we all do our lat pull downs the traditional way, or we all do our pull-ups the traditional way, from a complete overhead position to a complete, hands by your chest position. Maybe if we did more of a diagonal pull, or a crossbody pull would really unlock a lot of the strength of the lats purely. And they're no longer limited by the pec, rotator cuff, teres, which is what may be more dominant in the first portion of a pure pull down or pull up exercise. Very long-winded way to answer. I hope that makes sense.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And this is something I talk a lot about on my channel in regards to muscular overlap. People don't realize it, but at the top part of a pull-up, there is some chest activation. And if you just did some heavy benching prior, you could potentially see some recovery effects from that.
Yes, definitely. And you will experience that. You'll definitely experience that. And you can experience things like, hey, your body's fatigued, you fail at the task of a pull-up or a pull-down, but your lats have got so much left to give because it was really the rotator cuff or the pecs or something else that was dominating and fatiguing in that exercise. And that's where a lot of what Kasim does, I think, has got so much merit because it helps you realize where are the gaps in your training. Another
thing that Kasim will say is that the biceps do participate in shoulder flexion, but they're not shoulder flexors. Otherwise, we would just be doing front raises to build them up, right? So it's about identifying like what is the true primary function, out of all the available ones. Because we could even say supination, but you're not going to do pure supination to build your biceps. You're probably you're going to include a flexion component as well. So it's about identifying what that is and really targeting that tissue. So I think where it's most applicable is from a muscular blending standpoint pertaining to the split, how much recovery you're going to have between muscles, and also not making your training redundant within the session. For example, when we talk about sagittal pulls, you might be doing like a diagonal, the iliac pull down, but then you're doing that exact same motion on, say, a machine row. So you're biasing the same portion of the lats. So it would be the equivalent of just doubling your volume. You're not changing anything. So that's where it becomes relevant, But I agree with what you said that we don't know the muscular outcomes because the data is not there. All we have are biomechanical inferences, right? So although it's nice to know, until we have randomized controlled trials comparing the muscular outcomes, we can't say it's superior. And the same goes for machine versus free weights, right? But actually, we do have data on that, and apparently there is no difference. So that kind of also, makes you question the arguments against the free weights, right? Because technically, they require more coordination. They're not as stable. Yet when you actually compare the muscular outcomes, there's no difference. There's no difference with that. What about apples to close enough apples being like free weights, or cables, but it's more optimized,
Yeah. And that's, what you say about redundancy is so true. And I think this is a part of the thing of like machines versus free weights, for example. You can make such a clear case for why machines should be better. And even with the studies showing that they're similar, you can still say, look, they will be better because of the stability components. But that's always just looking at things like a textbook equation, like a simple math equation, when it's really not. When the human body is so varied and there's so much goes into it, and stability is an issue. It's going to be an issue on a barbell bench versus a machine press until it's not. And those little varied changes in technique as you reach a failure point that you wouldn't necessarily achieve on a machine press because it's so locked in and dialed in, just because you don't see the changes in the technique because the machine's fixed, doesn't mean there's no changes in the way that your brain is recruiting muscle fibers or that your body's repositioning itself within the body. There is so much that could be going on that's undetectable to the naked eye or imperceptible even to the user, and that can influence results. And that's why I don't put a lot of stock, into a lot of the studies, because they can give us a very strong indication as to what is probably going to be a good idea. But my takeaway from the machine versus free weights study is not that they're going to give you similar gains. It just shows that, it is kind of like they're going to give you similar gains, but it just means that, hey, like you can do what you want with training.
Exactly.
That's the real takeaway there, is do what you want. Don't be dogmatic. It's not that machines are better or barbells are better. It's just that you need to work out for yourself what's better for you. I love what you term and what Kasim calls the iliac pull down, not because it targets my iliac lat, but because I'm so fucking strong on it. I can get so much more load pulled on a single arm pull down. I can do the whole stack on my pull down, doing iliac pull down. You put me into a vertical overhead position, I don't have that same strength. Now that's a deficit for me I need to work on as well. But if I'm looking at like my pure mass building, progressive overload exercises, a barbell row falls into that. But for me personally, an iliac pull down falls into that as well. And
interesting.
Yeah, it's unstable technically and harder to set up, but I can set it up in my home gym successfully, and I've been doing it for 15 years. So I don't have a stability issue. I don't have a skill issue. It's something that's just been there. So And I like it. It feels really good. It blows my lats up more than anything else has, despite what the research will say on EMG placement or even ultrasound testing on lats. It's like the ultrasound testing tells me that lengthened partials are still good. It tells me that lat pull downs are good for the general population. How do I fit that into my own training? I'll do a little bit of everything still.
Sure. Everything works. And at the end of the day, the effort is what's most important. And
yes,
I think you're proving that right now, especially with the iliac pull down, because it's gained this reputation. And I've been guilty of this as well in terms of low-key vilifying it, but it's more so the TikTokification, like you mentioned earlier, right? That you have noobs getting on the floor doing the unstable version of it without the proper support, and they're not lifting heavy at all. They have a 4-to-1 cable pulley, and there's barely any weight on it. That's not the same as what you're doing. Actually training it as a proper hypertrophy movement, overloading it, grinding. I see your face is about to explode in your workouts. I can respect that. And I would do that myself as well. So it's about effort. And that's what's lacking in this day and age.
Yeah. And, I look at it from a different approach as well. I say, we see so many kids, or people talk about seeing so many kids doing these kneeling, single arm, cable, iliac pull down thing, and it's unstable and not using much weight. And they use that as an argument to tear the person down. I say, you know what? If I saw a kid doing that, just live and let live. Is it impacting you negatively, apart from maybe having to wait for your equipment? Probably not. And what journey is that kid going to go on? He's going to realize within a few weeks
That's true.
that he's not making progress, or that he needs to get heavy, because he knows. Everybody knows. You go to the gym, it's gym 101. You go heavier over time. He'll be like, I can't go as heavy. And he's going to realize, or she's going to realize, I need to find a way to make it more stable. And they'll problem solve over the course of, again, a couple or a few months. And then they'll transform and they'll love that movement. Why should we come in and say, no, you're wrong, you're not pushing hard enough, you're a pussy, do this exercise instead? Just let them do their thing. Let them enjoy and go on their own journey and go on their own lessons of like, okay, this is no longer working. I need to add a bench. I need to change exercise. I need to do something else. It's not really the movement's fault.
You're right. That's a positive way to look at it. And then you also have to ask, like, how did they end up in that position? Well, usually it's from following a fitness influencer who probably knew better, but let out that important piece of information.
Yes.
And in a sense, the trainee will still end up in the same spot, but there's going to be a little bit more trial and error. And maybe we can argue that's potentially a good thing, and that now they have to trust themselves. That said, we're talking about single arm work, but even with bilateral exercises, I think you would agree with your biomechanics field understanding that alignment is important to minimize joint stress. And of course, there's no inherently bad exercises, but could you explain to the viewers why you want to be lined up, whether it be for strength or hypertrophy?
The simple way I look at it is, and this is an oversimplified biomechanical view, but I think it's an important one to talk about, is imagine you're opening a door that's on hinges.
I love that example.
You open and close the door. The hinges work in just one plane of motion. And we have hinge joints, like your elbows and knees. So they open and close in that one direction. Now imagine if instead of pushing or pulling on the door, you pushed and pulled, but you also jerked up as you were pushing or pulling to open that door. You're going to put a lot more stress onto the hinge. And like we've all been in that situation probably where like you can imagine if you're opening a door with those mismatched forces, you're putting strain on the door hinge. The same case could potentially be made for the joints in the body. If there is a mismatch of forces, if there is a misalignment of forces, the forces being put on by your muscles or from the load that you're using, then there could potentially be more joint stress. Is that necessarily a bad thing? Who knows? But like, let's take an example of, push down, doing a triceps push down or a close grip bench press versus doing a single arm unilateral cable extension where everything is aligned. You can 100% make the case that the cable single arm extension is going to help you align forces better and reduce stress on the elbow joint. And I've seen thousands of cases where that's helped people with elbow pain and work around elbow pain as well. But does that also mean, and that by extension does also show me that the push down with a barbell or a close grip bench press does place more stress on the elbows. Does that mean that it's bad? No. It just means that there's going to be a trade-off there. You're able to use more weight and get more progression long-term out of those compound exercises that are more fixed with a barbell or a push down, but you're also going to concomitantly get joint stress. But your body can adapt to joint stress. It's meant to adapt to joint stress. And it will if you give it enough time. So you can build, the best bodies have been built on pure just joint stressful movements.
Pure restrictive movements.
Yeah. At the same time though, the best bodies have also been broken by those movements.
Yes.
You know? As much as you say, hey, like a guy like Dorian did skull crushes and push downs with his fixed barbell.
His triceps like that too.
His triceps. So it's like, you can make the case either way. But I can't say that Dorian would have made better progress if he'd done the cable single arm extension.
Right.
He might argue that, honestly. He might say that. He might say, you know what, I probably could have. But again, these are just where I tell people, these are the considerations to take into account. Where do you currently fall? The middle ground is probably what's best, which is probably do a little bit of both. And you can't always progress your push down till the end of time. You can't always do close grip bench press and skull crushes. There is a misalignment of forces. Eventually, those exercises will need to be relegated to maybe every other training block or maybe later in your workouts. And maybe you got to prioritize some of the more joint friendly exercises because we're trying to minimize stress because we're looking at trying to maybe max out our bench press as well. And we can't avoid that elbow stress. So we've got to avoid the overlaps and work around these issues. And people will come back and say, okay, Eugene, this is now super complicated. And I say, yeah, it is complicated because it's not necessary for you right now. And you shouldn't worry about it until you have to worry about it. When you're, at your level, going for you're doing a 4-plate bench press, you need to worry about elbow joint preservation. You need to worry about maybe not always doing skull crushes and heavy push downs and heavy close grip bench press whilst pursuing the exact same thing of a heavy bench press. Or if you are, you're very strategic. It's very complicated. For me, with my 225 bench press, I can do what the fuck I want because, hey, my joints aren't under that much stress and I've got to just get stronger over time. So yeah, on paper, this conversation is complicated, but for you, it's necessary. For me, it's unnecessary, and that's okay.
I love the nuances that you're bringing here, Eugene. It's like you're reading my mind right now. But also, you mentioned something very important, that right now you can get away with restrictive movements because of the absolute load. And I feel like that's not something that's talked enough about. Because if, again, we go back to the average viewer of YouTube Fitness, most of them are novice lifters, early intermediates, and they're afraid of performing certain movements that are quote unquote risky or have a higher risk to reward. Yet for them, it's not a concern. So all these things about axial loading and that the alignment needs to be perfect, at some point that might be the case when they're overhead pressing their body weight for reps, when they're doing push downs with 90 plus pounds and now they have to wear a belt like Dorian Yates, or they're doing skull crushers with over 100 pounds. Some of the strategies that you outlined before are very important, and I personally train that way all the time. That's why you're on point with this stuff. But for those who, if it doesn't apply right now, then why are you stressing about it? And this is what I see nowadays. It's guys who are training in a style that's not necessary for them right now, and they have more options, and that should be almost celebrated, especially if they enjoy those movements and they're avoiding it because of a false fear. So I think we need to give our body more credit that we are resilient. Load management is a thing. And if you're not in a position yet where the absolute loads are destroying your ability to recover, or you're not getting any joint stress, then why make a big deal out of it on social media?
Absolutely. It's a very tricky thing for the consumer to navigate, and even for me to navigate as a creator, to say, I love sharing a lot about my training. You love sharing a lot about your training. How do we translate this to people where they understand the different levels to the game, or they understand the trade-offs you're making and the risk-to-reward ratio? Because those things do exist. But the risk-to-reward ratio for a newbie to do deadlifts or not versus a guy like Thor Bjornsson, they're very different risk-to-reward ratios. They're the exact same movements, exact same exercise. Different risk-to-reward ratio for you and me as well. It's very different. And they look at what a lot of you and me or Thor Bjornsson might say about the exercise and think, oh, that now applies to me. And it doesn't. And it's a very challenging thing to navigate as a creator, saying, this is the considerations that I make into my training. It's not prescriptive to what you should do. It's an example that you should then use and take what is useful from that, or maybe completely disregard and say, you know what, that applies very little to my current context, so I can just ignore Eugene's advice now, not because it's bad, but because it's redundant to me. I'm going to give some advice that for you is completely redundant because you're at a very much more advanced level in terms of your training right now than I ever will be. And that's totally fair. That's what it is.
Let me ask you, Eugene, what other important training variables do you track or you think are important for the average lifter that requires less nuance? That these are staples that pretty much everyone should follow?
I look at the body through movements. of the push, pull, hinge, squat, those kind, twist, rotate, flex the spine, the easier broad movement patterns. And I say, hit those however you want to. Whether it's barbell row versus cable row versus iliac kind of row or whatever, that's a secondary option. The first thing you need to do is, are you hitting all the major movement patterns through a large range of motion? And are you able to progress whatever movements you've chosen for that? Because when it comes to the simplest look at my philosophy of is, what movements can the body do? Are you training them? Are you loading them? And are you progressing them? It's as simple as that. Everything else we talk about, like, hey, should you do skull crushes, or should you do single arm cable, or should you do push down, or should you do a close grip bench press? It's like, well, what is the goal here? We're training elbow extension. You're not even training triceps, you're training elbow extension.
Yeah.
Have you chosen an exercise that allows you to train successfully with good coordination and stability through a large range of motion and progress it long term? You can say yes to all those different exercises at certain points in your career. You know, at certain points in my career, I couldn't say yes to that in terms of it not hurting me when I was doing skull crushes. I had to stop doing skull crushes.
Right.
Unless if I did maybe a very slow eccentric with pauses. So then you'd see my training. I'd say, hey guys, I'm doing a skull crusher with a 3-stage pause on the way down with a 10-second eccentric, and I do a pullover into a press, not a full skull crusher. And people are like, oh, that's nerdy, overcomplicated. I say, well, it is for you, but for me, it's not. But it achieves the goal that I want of training elbow extension. And 20 million other exercises could achieve the exact same thing, and that's fine. So to make it simple for the audience of what you should do is ask yourself, what is the movement pattern you're trying to train? Can you take that movement through a large range of motion, under load, and in a way that's easily able for you to progress it long term? Not week to week, but like, over a few months. Is there a way for you to be able to easily add more weight to the bar or change your leverages for a bodyweight exercise to make it objectively, quantifiably progressive long term?
So analyze the fundamental movement patterns and make sure that they have high progression potential for the long term.
Yes.
Excellent.
And that's so broad then. And it's up to you to decide how nerdy do you want to make it? How much fun do you want to have with this? As much as you and I love Pelican Curl, I would happily tell many people, don't ever touch this because it's not necessary for you. It's fine. And that's okay.
Sure.
Like, it's up to you to decide. We love this shit. It's our job. Of course we love this shit. For somebody who's a hobbyist, who's actually like a computer programmer on the side as their main gig, they don't care about this shit, and that's fine. It's a hobby to them. Keep doing your curls. You're going to make better progress than 99.9% of people out there as long as you push yourself hard. And that's okay.
Yeah, I think we get lost in our passion sometimes. And
yes.
I'll get a lot of comments like, are you training for a war? It's because it does look a bit, I don't want to say psychotic, but sometimes we're doing exercises that, like, do you really need to be doing that? But we want to because it fits our needs. We could progress it. We're not getting hurt in the process, and ultimately it works. If you can provide reasons why X exercise is not a gimmick, then people can't say anything except for strawman your position and say, oh, you're overcomplicating things.
Yeah.
Your push down hack where you were standing on a band. You got a lot of backlash for that, but I thought it was genius. And I'm doing that to this day, a couple months later.
Yes.
Or your sissy squat hack on the deficit, they're going to say, just do a barbell back squat. But what if you're trying to get that tibia as low as possible, maximally load the quadriceps, get the rec fem in with a fractional load, such that body weight is enough, or even a 45-pound plate. So these are things that apply to you, especially having squatted massive loads in the past and your legs are enormous. But for a novice lifter, they might not understand. Yeah.
And that's what I say before. Like, it's hard for me to navigate sometimes. Like, I want to share what I do. I enjoy sharing what I do. And the things that I do share, like, I share a lot of basic, like, here's me squatting, the end. Here's me doing a leg press, boring. But the way that the nature of algorithms is, it's not by choice. The algorithms will pick up the sissy squat or the push down, and they'll take it off to the wider audience. Like, well, take 2 extra seconds to look at what I'm doing. I'm doing a lot of very traditional movements as well. But it's very hard for me to sometimes reconcile how do I share what I do and what I love and make sure it's not taken the wrong way. And unfortunately, there's a degree of it that will always be taken the wrong way, no matter how well you try to justify and contextualize things. That's just part of, it comes with the territory of creating content, and that's okay. I've come to accept that.
Yeah, but you know what? Real ones will see that you're not trying to mislead them. It's pretty simple. So if you know you're not doing anything wrong, then just keep showing what you believe is correct and let the ad hominems continue. So
yeah.
On that note, I want to ask you about cheat reps and resistance profiles. Do you ever program that with yourself or clients?
Yes, plenty of times. Like I'll often tell people, just keep going so you can barely move that weight, or like do your goal is to hit 8 to 12, like full range, quality form. And then on this exercise, get a few more extra reps out, whether it's by partials, lengthened partials, if you want to call them that, or if it's through cheat reps, as long as it's something that can be quantifiably consistent across the board. Like your cheat reps should still look within some kind of controlled domain of like, yeah, it's ugly, but not horrendously ugly. I'm not cringing at the sight of it. Because there's something where I think Mark Israel may have a counter argument to and say, you know what, why not do a Maya rep? Or why not do a drop set or something instead of doing a cheat rep? And I say, well, I think we've gotten a little bit too scared of fatigue, the fatigue boogeyman. Of like, you're going to get so fatigued systemically, neurally from pushing to a cheat rep. You're going to see such form breakdowns, going to put your tissues at risk, and you're going to injure yourself. And again, like, I like the cheat reps. One thing for maybe the hypertrophy stimulus, but more so for the resilience you're going to get from going to compromised positions under fatigue conditions. It's important to have that. You're going to have that from time to time. You can make the case for or against in terms of hypertrophy stimulus, but in terms of total body stimulus and the fact that we are resilient, that little bit of extra strain is not going to kill you and not going to put you to a position where you can't recover from it, as long as you intelligently progress your way into it. It's like, I think it's another fantastic tool to be using, and a very underrated one.
Sure.
In the pursuit of good technique.
Yeah. I think people have this misconception that cheat reps are complete form breakdown. Like if you're doing a cheat row, it's just a deadlift and then you're bending your arms like a quarter inch. But assuming it doesn't look horrendous, like you can tell, okay, there's a little bit of body English, but it's nothing crazy, or you're bending your back a little bit on an overhead press, then we could make the argument that you're getting more resilient. And even talking about the lengthened position, maybe that's magnifying the way to stretch. I know Menno Henselman's made that case before. He actually recommends fast eccentrics, still getting full range of motion in the bottom, but the fact that on some exercises the shortened position is the natural sticking point, maybe cheating through that and then accelerating that negative is beneficial for hypertrophy. And it's not going to be a case where the fatigue vastly outweighs the stimulus. Maybe they can somewhat be balanced, I think people forget that the stimulus fatigue ratio, first of all, we can't quantify it. It all depends how strong you are and your experience level and how good or bad the form is. And then we also have to acknowledge that, sure, you might be getting a lot of fatigue, but you're also getting a lot of stimulus. And I don't know why that part of the conversation is neglected.
Yeah, absolutely. And stimulus is more than just muscle building. Like, I love a good cheat row. I love a good explosive row. Not just for the lats. I mean,
for more than the lats.
Yeah, the best back pumps I've ever had have been from just hoisting weights on a cable row, letting my body run, letting my body use some English. Same with barbell rows. And probably some of the best progress I made to my backsides came from that, because it wasn't just lats up back, it was erectors, but it was also total body coordination. The amount, I know I might be misquoting, but I'm pretty sure. I know Ed Cohen on his pure deadlift programs, he'd be doing a lot of barbell rowing, cheat barbell rows. The Lillibridges, some of the strongest humans in the world, they'd be doing a lot of barbell rows for erector endurance, for their erectors. Now, people say, oh, just do some more hyperextensions, do some RDLs for your erectors. Like, yeah, but it's different. The tension might be the same on the muscle. The mechanical tension on the pure fiber of your erectors may be similar, but the total body coordination that's required to lift a heavy weight explosively like that using your entire body and controlling that kind of weight in the extreme ranges, it's a very different beast. Very, very different beast. And the payoffs to that, honestly, we just don't know. That's not going to be studied.
It won't be. We can speculate the mechanisms, talking about resistance profiles, but anecdotally, again, going back to cheat rows, especially like Penlay rows, with some heavy weights, you're not getting a bunch of muscle damage either in the bottom, right?
Yeah.
So that kind of gets rid of that potential con of the fatigue aspect. But in general, a lot of powerlifters use barbell rows as a deadlift accessory, not even for pure upper back hypertrophy necessarily. So I think there's something to that regarding the spinal erector endurance, instead of just programming more RDLs and good mornings and hypers, or maybe you're lowering your leg training frequency and you'll compensate by doing more cheat rows just to get a little bit more posterior chain. So there's nuance to everything, But I was just curious about your take on it. So then, regarding like the spinal erectors, what common muscular weaknesses do you see? And which ones are underrated in your opinion?
Erectors is a huge one. Even though everybody deadlifts, or a lot of people do deadlifts, I think taking them through spinal flexion to get a proper stretch into the erectors, big deficit there. Big deficit in hip flexor strength. And I don't know, we could quantify it to muscles, but I'll say another big deficit is rotation. Rotation, twisting of the body. So like in movement pattern language, we're looking at hip flexion, we're looking at rounding the back and twisting the back. They're big, big areas that I see people are leaving a lot of, maybe not muscular gains on the table, but total body armor points on the table, which can then probably translate to better muscle building outcomes because you can safely push yourself harder and get more out of your training. Like nothing helps my stability on a Bulgarian split squat or a heavy barbell Zercher squat or whatever. Nothing helps it more than warming up with hip flexor work. It
hip
feels
flexor
better.
work and trunk rotation.
Yeah.
You're unlocking new positions.
Yeah, just doing a few sets, light or heavy, whatever you want, of loaded hip flexion, doing a couple of like cable rotation exercises. Nothing will lock you in better for a heavy squat to brace yourself. And nothing will unlock that range of motion in the bottom of a squat better than the hip flexion work. It's profound. And people just aren't really doing that kind of stuff much because they're not sexy muscles.
Yeah, but they are important, especially for some of the exercises you're showing. So could you walk us through some of your favorites for those three areas? So the hip flexion, the spinal flexion, and the trunk rotation.
Hip flexion, I normally go something simple like I've got the monkey boots where you can attach weights to your feet, or you can just use a small resistance band or a piece of rope or whatever, a strap to tie a small weight to your foot or your ankle, also an ankle strap on a cable station, and just do that literal hip flexion motion, bring your knee towards your chest with some kind of load. So there's many options there. That's the simplest one that I use most of the time. I also do direct hip flexion work with maybe like a GHD setup, but depending on where you set your pivot points of your body, you can make it more ab focused or more hip flexion focused. So I'll do it more for hip flexors if that's the current goal. That will take care of that most of the time. For rotation, I normally do just a cable rotation, so some kind of cable twist. Although I do incorporate a lot of throws, like crossbody medicine ball explosive throws. I think heavily, heavily underrated for developing a lot of that crossbody power through trunk rotation and spinal flexion. So Jefferson curls are a big one for me, and that'll usually come just at least once a week. And then just incorporating round back in things like my rows, barbell rows, dumbbell rows, just letting that spine round, doing it intentionally and under control, but also like allowing under control, slow, smooth, is level 1. Level 5 or 10 or whatever is doing that explosive, doing it powerfully, throwing shit around.
You can say that.
Some people like an Eric Bugenhagen, he's at level 10.
Yes.
Maybe genetically he was blessed. Like some people are blessed with, I've got really good calf genetics. Maybe he was blessed with the neural efficiency to be able to move that weight efficiently as well and have that level 10 prowess over a barbell row and spinal flexion. And that's something that doesn't get considered as well as genetics at play in terms of not just strength, but your ability to move and recover from certain positions. People are just more resilient. Some people are just built to be fucking linebackers in the NFL. I'm not one of them.
So then you wouldn't personally be horsing massive loads the way Bugenhagen does it?
I would, but it wouldn't be as quickly as him. And I'd respect where I'm at. I'd say, you know what, Boogs, you're level 10, I'm level 2. And I respect that. I want to get to level 10. So what's my roadmap there? And it may take me a couple of years or a couple of months, even a couple of workers, who knows, to be able to get to that level. But I have to respect that progression. It's like me saying, like, you can do a 405 bench press. That's level 10. You've clocked the game of bench pressing, bro. You can stop now. But it's like, I'm on level 2 still. How do I get to your level? I need to progress there. I'm not going to get there overnight. There's levels to the game. And levels to the game of technique as well.
Sure. In terms of getting to those levels, say, talking about the Jefferson curl, do you perform all the variations of it? So with the barbell in your hand, standing on a plyometric box, then the Zercher position, and then going from, say, 135 to 225, like how far are you willing to take some of these weighted stretching movements that also have a mobility component? Because you're not just doing this for pure hypertrophy, you're trying to unlock deeper ranges of motion. So because some people now are saying that Jefferson curls are overrated, right?
Yeah.
What would be your, say, counter-argument to that?
They can be overrated if they're misapplied. If you're doing the Jefferson curl under the context of trying to build muscle, it's a waste of time. It's overrated. Like, you're wasting your time with them. If you're doing it to optimize your mobility, your movement, and to build that long term, it is incredibly underrated. All the variations on a plyo box with a barbell in hand, Zercher position, whatever variation you can think of, it is incredibly underrated as an exercise, or adequately rated, something that you should be doing if you want to build those things. And just people just don't do that enough, or they're misapplying it as a thing. Like, I wouldn't program a bench press, a barbell bench press, if my goal is mobility. It's overrated for that. It's misapplied for that.
You do a deficit weighted push up or an acid grass dip, something like that.
Yeah, there are much better applications of the exercise.
So then where do you see super range of motion, or rather extended, and hypertrophy? Like, where do you draw the line between full ROM and like going beyond?
I categorize it differently in my workouts. Like, I'll have discrete blocks, like in not just in like programming phase, but the actual workout itself, where I'll say, okay, the last exercise of my workouts is a mobility thing. So it's going to be something that is super ROM. But should I do that same super ROM on if the movement was more for hypertrophy or strength? Absolutely not. And I wouldn't expect the same gains on it. So as long as I've got it categorized appropriately in my workouts, I know what to expect coming into it. I know what the progression should be. So like on a Jefferson curl, I could add weight to the bar each week or each month or whatever. But I would rather add weight to the bar in inverted commas by adding an extra inch to my range.
Yeah.
And that's what people are sort of looking at. They think, oh, it's a weighted stretch, so the goal should be to add weight to it. It's like, no, it's a weighted stretch. The goal is mobility. So what's your metric? It's not weight bar on the weight on the bar. It should be the range of motion you're accessing. So how are you personally tracking your mobility? How deep can you go? Do you have certain blocks in place? Like I literally use like a block pull, and say, okay, that's where my range is going to be today. Next week, I'm going to lower that deficit. I'm going to lower it more and more, and just keep hitting that same range of motion or deeper range of motion over time. Exact same weights. So you might have, it could be like 45-pound plates on the ground. That's that kind of height. And then each week you increase the deficit, or every 4 weeks, whatever your progression model is, but the weight stays the same. That's progressive overload for that movement anyway. I wouldn't recommend that if you're doing an RDL for glute size or a hamstring size. I was like, that's fucking dumb. You just add weight to the bar. But what's the goal of the movement? It's mobility. So you should have discrete measures in place for how you're going to measure mobility.
Right. So adding weight is almost the last step in a sense. First is to unlock those extra inches or two. So how far can you take the deficit? If you're standing on a 2-inch box, maybe you could do 4-inch, 6-inch, 8-inch. You can take it quite far to the point where it almost looks like you're in the bottom of a pull-up, but just upside down. Pretty much.
Like, that brings up a good question of like, how far should you take the mobility? Do you want to get to a point where you're able to kiss your knee kind of thing, or you're able to get your I know David Thurin, a friend of mine, he's like trying to get his, I think it's head to ankle or something, like insane hamstring flexibility. It's like, do you and I ever want to get there? Probably not. So we'd probably stop halfway at that point and start increasing the weight.
Right.
Instead. So you got to ask yourself, what is your limit that you want to get to? Once you get there with the range, add the weight. And if you want more, stop adding the weight, or slow down the weight progression and increase the mobility progression instead. That's your own journey. Nobody can tell you what to do except for you in terms of like what you think would be cool.
Nice. That is fantastic advice. So then I want to ask you, how do you approach load management, overuse, and injury prevention? How does that all tie in together?
It's a very simple thing, honestly. On paper, it's just I track all my weights. I track everything I do, and I track how I'm feeling each day. I just have like simple markers like, am I feeling good? Am I recovering? Am I sleeping well? All these markers going well? And I inevitably reach a point where things are going downhill, where sleep starts to feel like shit, appetite's shit, energy's shit, load is starting to plateau as well. And at that point, I honestly keep going for a little bit longer, because that tells me I'm in an overreaching point, which is good. The goal of training is to reach a point of feeling like absolute shit. That's part of it. Like 30-year training should have you feel like absolute ass. And that's when you push a little bit harder and then you pull back a little bit. But as long as I'm not doing anything too excessive in terms of the volumes, number of exercises, intensities overall, but most importantly, because what's excessive, as long as I'm not making excessive leaps between each week. So I ask myself, what's a reasonable amount of progression? And I'm sure there is some science out there saying what it could be, but I would say anything between like 1 to 10% progression over a month period, where that's 1 10% extra mobility, 1% extra weight you're able to lift, reps you're able to get, that's a good progression. If I'm making 20% progression every single week on an exercise, load, range of motion, reps or whatever, that tells me I started way too low, which happened, that's fair enough. I could be doing that intentionally. Or something is, I'm around the corner from hurting myself if I'm making such rapid improvements, because the body doesn't adapt that quickly. There are certain, even with steroids, there are certain limits to the rate of progression you're able to see, unless if you're making concessions elsewhere by changing technique. Like if I went from a strict row to a cheat row, that increases in my load by 20%. That should tell me that, hang on, is my body really adapted to the cheat row technique? Possibly not. Curb your enthusiasm. You got away with it today, but be smart. Take it to a point where you can just see the 10% progression over a month, roughly. And everyone's different. That's an advanced lifter versus a beginner lifter. There's going to be differences there. But I think that's a good rule of thumb. It's around 1 to 10%, giving you room for plateaus and whatnot over a month. It's a good rate. Looking at it as a lifelong endeavor. 1% a month sounds like sweet fuck all. I'm sure you'd love 1 to 5% a month on your bench press for 12 months.
That's why I was mathing out in my head. I'm like, I can't even get 10%. Even if I try to rush it, it's not possible.
Absolutely. Like,
so yeah, I would take that.
Yeah, you would love 1% a month for 12 months because that would be a significant increase in your bench press.
Yes. So that's, you added a microplate per side.
It's significant.
That doesn't seem like much, but I guess people don't realize how, like, it is diminishing returns after a certain point.
Of course.
And the more you try to rush things, the more injuries you will accumulate. Overuse will always creep up on you. There's no shortcuts in this game. Your body will force you to take a deload if you don't listen to it. Yeah. So you might as well just enjoy the ride.
Absolutely. Have you had any big injuries yourself?
I actually have not. And I think it's because of my conjugate background.
Yeah.
I've been maxing out for 10 years straight now. But again, when I hit that point where I can feel a little bit achy, which is usually going to be some golfer's elbow, or maybe a little bit of shoulder discomfort. It's not actually my pecs that are the limiter. It's always the shoulder, right?
Right.
When I get to that point, I just take a deload and everything is fine. And I make sure to rotate in a lot of movements just to strengthen all the joint angles, you know? I do extended range of motion, regular, very similar to what you do, but I go above and beyond with the overloading. But I've been very fortunate in that regard, and I would also credit calisthenics. And actually, regarding injury prevention on presses, there's a video you made, I think 2 years ago, talking about the number one bench press mistake pertaining to the scapulohumeral rhythm.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Do you still believe in that? And if so, could you cover what that mistake is?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't call it the number one mistake anymore. Even back then, you know, you've got to play the game a little bit and say,
sure.
I still think it's number one mistake because everyone's doing it, thinking that it's going to be preserving them from injury. And it's a powerlifting technique. You know, maintaining full depression and retraction, chest up all the time, very important for lifting very heavy loads. Very important for reducing range of motion. But in terms of how the body's meant to be moving, if you only do that for your bench press, for all of your presses, you only do retraction work and you never do any protraction, there's going to be a deficit in your serratus. There's going to be a deficit, not even just in movement quality, but just in your muscular imbalances. And that can have impacts. There's a reason why, you know, there is the stereotypical posture of a powerlifter of someone who's got the duck butt, the fixed shoulder, lat flare kind of position. It's because they're training that so well. And it has its benefits, but a lot of powerlifters tell you the first thing that they avoid, I guess, is protraction training because it's exactly what they don't want to do. It's reverse of what they're meant to be doing for the skill of powerlifting. And this is where people look at what the best in the world do. Say, oh, the best bench presses, the strongest people in the world retract a press. That's the right way to do it. Like that's the right way to do it for their goals. But your goal of increasing bench press alongside being able to move well and have strength over your entire body, which is what 99% of people's goals really are, while still making progression, there should be some protraction occurring. You don't need to be completely fixed in place all the time. And doing that can be the reverse of what your body wants to be doing. So whether it's on flat bench pressing with a barbell or not, I think there should be some kind of pressing motion where you let your scapula move. Even just a push-up, you know?
I was just going to say that. Yeah. So someone, if they do have powerlifting goals, but they still want to maintain that protraction element, maybe first of all, they can include push-ups on the side, really emphasizing the protraction.
Yeah.
Or maybe they can simply, because I noticed in the way you're demonstrating now, perhaps you can retract at the bottom and protract at the top if there's somehow afraid.
Yes.
Or in general, just unlocking your scapula, even with dead hangs, getting some shoulder traction in there. Because
absolutely.
And I think a lot of people do have an underdeveloped serratus, because that's a muscle that should even pop when you're relatively fluffy, in my opinion.
Absolutely. If you got like the top 4-pack, you should be like a little bit of intercostal serratus kind of thing, because they're muscles that can hypertrophize and should be if you're training them. And I guess, it's mainly more about not saying the bench press technique of retraction is bad, but what usually comes along for the ride with that technique is an exclusion of protraction, exclusion of elevation and mobility work for the shoulders. That's a better take on it.
Yeah, but I could see that that's what you're trying to say, because you're specifically emphasizing the word protraction. I want to ask you a general question about fatigue and motor unit recruitment. How do you view the topic of shorter rest intervals and junk volume pertaining to this? Like, what would be some general recommendations? Where do you side? Because I see you mentioned Dorian Yates a lot, and I've seen who you surround yourself with. So I'm curious, like, what you believe is more applicable.
Yeah. If I was to give a blanket recommendation for the goal of hypertrophy or strength, I'd say longer rest periods are going to be more beneficial. Because definitely, like, we know for sure, shorter rest intervals, you're going to see a decreased output from the nervous system to be able to recruit motor units. Just because you're tired. Like, your body can only send out the nervous impulse so many times at a certain rate. It needs time to recover and regenerate that. Now, what does that look like in terms of the discrete interval of 60 seconds, 45 seconds, 90 seconds, 2 minutes? It's hard to say definitively, but I err more on the side of like longer would be more beneficial. And that's where I tend to side towards. Like, I go usually like between 1 to 3 minutes on most exercises, if not even longer on some of the more heavy compound things like a heavy squat. If I'm doing triples or fives, it could be up to 10 minutes sometimes, because I really need to just have that time to feel confident that I'm going to be able to give it my maximal effort again and get a successful set out. But I wouldn't say that's what everybody should be doing. But that's for the blanket recommendation hypertrophy. But I'll also say that there are merits to going shorter rest intervals, like 30 seconds or lower. One thing from a conditioning perspective, which I think is, very heavily underrated, but that's kind of like changing the argument or moving the goalpost a little bit. But for conditioning perspective, definitely circuit-based training, giant set training, condensing things down more of a density-based approach, fantastic as a way to improve your conditioning. But from a fatigue perspective, I'm happy to be proven wrong on this one, but I would suspect that taking short rest intervals, something like a bicep curl, you're essentially doing something like a myo rep now, or a cluster set, if you're doing like these short rest intervals. So you're able to get still some quality reps out in a shorter amount of time. So maybe, I could have made more progression in terms of the numbers on the bar or whatever if I did 3-minute rest intervals between sets of curls. But if I only took 30 seconds rest periods, yes, I'm less recovered neurally, but that may just mean I'm going to be able to access that perceived level of effort faster, which is what we're really going for here.
I always find interesting how, like in a mile rep context, you're resting 10, 15 seconds, and somehow you're able to reaccess the high threshold motor units.
Yes.
But if you do 30, like a little bit more, somehow you're not able to recruit them anymore.
Off. Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. And that's where I'm like, what people say, what I just said is all makes perfect sense. You need longer rest periods so your brain can recuperate, send that impulse out, recruit high threshold motor units. But then how do myo reps work? How do they still let you tap into those motor units? Because they still do. I think it is exercise context dependent. Like, I'm not going to do a myo rep on a back squat. I'm not dissipating that fatigue fast enough. But isolations, I think the whole fatigue thing could be a little bit overstated at times. And there are benefits to maybe pushing that, because the real goal is for the high threshold motor unit recruitment, perceived level of effort is high. And assuming that we're not completely shortchanging our rest periods where your brain is completely brain dead and can't send out the impulse, I think we should be able to get our short rest intervals.
I think leg training is one of the few exceptions if we're talking about heavy squats and deadlifts, because there's also a massive bracing component and the cardiovascular demand.
Yes.
On a lot of isolation movements, it's not really a concern unless it's something that has tremendous progression potential. What about like resistance profiles? Would that be factored in, like a shortened position movement maybe being easier for rest pause compared to more lengthened?
Yeah, that's definitely, like, this is getting into the super nerdy weeds about it. Yeah, but you're absolutely right. There's going to be less damage accumulated on something like a spider curl versus a preacher curl. They're both very similar looking movements, but just that extra shortened emphasis versus more of a lengthened emphasis is going to be less damage on the shortened emphasis. There's going to be more metabolic metabolite accrual on the shortened emphasis, and that means things will hurt more. You get that bigger pump, but it may mean less overall like long-term fatigue.
Yeah, I guess there are things that we don't know right now.
Yeah,
we got to see how the data evolves
about it. And there probably is some, people much smarter than me will be able to tell you, oh, actually, this is what happens with the calcium ion channels. Or like, okay, that's fair
I was going to ask you about that too, about neuromechanical matching.
Out of my pay grade. Out of my pay. I do know for sure that neuromechanical matching is promising, but it's something that really hasn't been studied enough to be able to make any definitive statements on. Like I've looked, and there's not much research on it. And there's no, to my knowledge so far, research on it for the goals of hypertrophy that are shown as applications. It makes a lot of sense in theory. But man, communism makes sense in theory. It doesn't mean that it's something that we should be doing. There's a lot of in theory. So there's a lot of mechanistic data on supplements that turn out to be bunk in human actual application. So it falls under that in my eyes.
Even in nutritional science, there's mechanisms and then there's reality. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it sounds good on paper and it might turn out to be correct. And if so, great. But I think jumping the gun is a bit of a stretch, because we don't even have like proper data. Like,
definitely.
A lot of it is old as well. And people are just pulling out of it now,
Yeah, which is weird. I don't know why it's popped off now in the last couple of years or so as a new thing. And it's like, well, it's been around for a while and it hasn't really taken off because it's kind of like meh in terms of its applications, honestly. Like, will it really change that much significantly? Same as the lengthened partial stuff, like I love the idea of it. It's been around for a very, very long time, since before the 50s or so it was around as a thing. People don't realize that. Like, people think, oh, it's John Meadows. It wasn't from John Meadows. He got it from John Perillo many, many years ago. And is the introduction of that, even if Jeff Nippard's study came out saying it was unequivocally better than full range of motion training, would it actually change so much of how we train? Honestly, I don't think so. I don't think it would change how Mr. Olympia trains. I don't think it would change how I would train. Even if it gave me 20% more muscle mass growth, I'd say, you know what? I still respect the full range for other benefits as a human.
That's true. Well, that's how I look at it as well, in terms of the preservation of joint angle stress in certain ranges. For example, if all you do is lengthen partials on the bench press, you might develop a lockout weakness over time.
Yes.
You might be understimulating your triceps on the bench. And for some, that might be their goal. What if your pecs are overdeveloped and you're trying to become more arm dominant? Well, maybe then avoiding that deep stress is to your benefit.
Yes.
So it depends on the individual's goals. You have to factor in the muscle damage and the extra recovery demands of doing all this lengthened work. And then you have to ask, like, is that the only thing you should be doing? Or is there a way to mix everything in so that you kind of get the best of all worlds? And to me, that seems to be what you're doing. Like, you have exercise that emphasize the length of position, but it's not all you do. It's just, it's lengthened biased, but you're also including the mid-range and a lot of traditional motions that throughout time, no one's had trouble building muscle with them or getting stronger.
Yes. Yeah.
Would you say that, well, this is my lead-on question, but have we forgotten a lot of lessons from the past? Looking at, because you just mentioned a name that I never heard about before, right? But like, are there some OGs that when you look at their information from the 40s, 50s, and 60s, even the golden era, that now you see it coming back full circle and you're like, this was talked about already. And we already know why it works, but now it's just being confirmed. Like, how do you view the confirmation of bro science in today's day and age?
Yeah. I don't like it when people take and this is my personal opinion. I don't like when people say, people have been doing this for years already. Science just proves what bro scientists already knew or whatever. It's like, well, that's the point of science. Like, science isn't meant to necessarily discover something new. We use scientific research to help to confirm hypotheses. Where do we get the hypothesis from? From bro scientists or from real applications. And then we want to help confirm it. Like, that's the point, bro. We're trying to confirm what you're doing to help to understand it better, to give it validity. like we want more bro scientists. But yeah, there has been so much that's just been lost and forgotten. So much. And in a relatively short amount of time. Like a guy like John Meadows, it saddens me to a point, given how impactful he's been on the industry, but also on my life. But it saddens me how irrelevant that name has become in the last 5 years since his passing.
I know.
And it's like, that's absurd. And then you think about, one of his biggest mentors was a guy I mentioned before, John Perillo. He was around through like the 50s, through the 80s, 90s. Well, he's still around now, honestly, still doing stuff. But most people know who he is. But he was doing you got Ben Patrick, knees over toes guy, ATG split squat. Man, one thing is from Charles Poliquin, but also you go to John Perillo's old work, his old books from the 80s, he's got this split squat with the specific goal of lengthening the rear leg hip flexor. And he would specifically change the higher deficit or the assistance there to make it regressible based on your flexibility. This stuff, it's not because Ben Patrick stole it. I don't believe that at all. This is not a dig at him. But it's like, this stuff is not new. It's just we've got different players who are promoting the same ideas, which I think is good. But we should be looking back and saying, what else have we forgotten? What else has been lost over time? Because so much value has been lost. And we say, oh, it's outdated shit now. And I think this happens in any industry, in life. You know, history forgets, but it does repeat itself. So yeah, we're looking at forgotten secrets, I guess, of training from the golden era, or not even golden, back then.
Let's go bronze to golden, or even the 90s, because I think things changed after the early 2000s.
Yeah, I would say some of the most important secrets, I guess, that have been forgotten was just this idea of hybrid training. You know, like if you look back to a lot of the old time lifters, even like through the 70s or whatever, you know, like when I've trained with Tom Platz, you'd think, okay, he's like the pure squat OG lifting god. He would go on the most intense bike rides, you know?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, like that was, he's not going to say that's how he built his quads. He's never going to tell you that. He's not going to, he's not going to lie like that. But he'd be doing the most insane leg days. And then part of the workout was going and doing all-out sprints on his bike up and down the pier. There was an approach where, you know, even like Franco Columbu or Frank Zane, they were doing Olympic lifting. They were doing strongman type stuff. They were doing more than just pure bodybuilding. Now we've gotten so scientific and so hyper-specific and focused in our approach, saying, oh, actually, that's not going to be good because you're going to be targeting the wrong type of muscle fibers that aren't going to be giving you as much growth. Or it's like, well, again, we're looking at the human body. These guys, it's understood, train hard, push your body. And even if you're going to get a little bit less optimal gains, maybe it's going to give you better gains elsewhere. Or it's a long game, or it's more like the holistic approach to the human body. This was a thing. This was a thread that was very big through much of physical culture. It was not like, it was specializing in bodybuilding competitively, but it wasn't neglecting other aspects of fitness. It was physical fitness is physical fitness. A lot of calisthenics, a lot of gymnastics, a lot of just
culture,
mobility. It wasn't down to one exercise, but it was more about the acceptance of more and the pursuit of just overall physical prowess above just the pure muscle size. And I think that has influenced a lot of the way that bodybuilders look these days. You know, that's a complete theory now, and that's, you know, there's no science to back that up. But I think, yes, we're getting bigger. We have these incredibly aesthetic as well, mass monsters, but they're at a big deficit because of the neglect that they've put on their body from other styles of training. They can't move well. I would happily argue that they could have just as much progress, but move better had they incorporated 10% of other styles of training alongside their pure bodybuilding work. Like, we'll never know for sure unless if we get more case studies, but I'd assume that.
We could flip it around. Let's say we can take these old timers and teleport them in today's sphere, and you have them training more like modern bodybuilders. Like, that would be their supplementary work. Maybe they'd be just as big, but also have all the performance and mobility benefits.
Yeah, yeah. Like, I would love to see John Grimmick juiced to the gills. You know, I'd love to see some of these old school guys, like even like a Larry Scott or something, or a Bill Pearl. You put them on enough juice, it'd be fucking cool.
Yeah, because
it would be cool.
Yeah. Sergio Olivia, Larry Scott already had some of the craziest arms we've ever seen. Arnold had the most massive chest, even by today's standards, and he didn't have the same cocktail of drugs, you know?
Yeah.
So what if you took the best of the past and then combined them with what we know now about bodybuilding?
Yeah.
You could say the physiques would have looked even better. Even when we talk about the vacuum, that was an underrated look, and even, you know, the usage of the pullovers and a lot of calisthenics and extended range of motion. Like, this was all done back in the day. And I like that you pointed out these bodybuilders. They were also athletes in that they competed in different sports, usually Olympic weightlifting or powerlifting, or crazy enough using gymnastic rings. That was a thing in the silver era.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was big. And like, even if, you know, in this hypothetical situation, if these guys transported to the future looked equally as good as the current Mr. Olympias, they're going to move better. They're going to perform better. They're going to be able to do more than just pose, which I think it'd be cool to see. As you know, it's never going to happen, but it's an interesting conversation of, like, again, what's missing? What's missing from today?
Right.
Why is everybody so broken and beat up? despite looking the part, what are the big deficits? They're not athletes.
Yeah, I think muscle biasing aside, it's like you said, they would move better and unlock better ranges of motion, so they're not stuck in a small window of exercises. But on that note, I did, because you have this beautiful gym where there are a lot of machines. Which ones do you feel are most valuable for the average trainee? Assuming they train at a regular commercial gym, they'll be dealing with the basics. Not everyone has like full-on Atlantis equipment, right? So like, what are the pieces that can be mixed into hybrid training? Because there's some really bad machines and there's some good ones as well, right?
If I had to, and I've had the conversation to myself in the past, if I had to get rid of everything, or I had to like train in my home gym, which I've done in the past, like in my actual garage, the only machine I'd really want would be a back machine, like a row machine. That's it.
Really?
Everything else, like dumbbells, cables, the basics, of course, like that's always going to be there. Barbells, dumbbells, cables, that's a staple. But out of everything else, the only other machine that I would see as essential as that for development of muscle strength, everything, would be a machine, row. Specifically, I've got this prime one just over my shoulder here. It's very hard for that resistance profile. You can't get the same length and challenge on a barbell row. Even with manipulating things like tempo and eccentrics and things like that, the benefits of having a very well-supported and braced row exercise where you can challenge the length in position through placement of the load on the pins, it's very hard to do. Everything else can be achieved just as well, if not better, using barbells, dumbbells, body weights, cables. That's the one thing that I think, it's really hard to do. And, maybe a leg curl, because you can do dumbbell leg curls, you can do cable leg curls, but when you have such a basic piece of equipment like a leg curl machine, it's like, well, it's just more convenient and simpler to use.
How would that contrast with your idea of performing Nordic curls for hybrid gains?
I love Nordic curls. It took me 12 months to get 2 unbroken full range reps. And it's like, are people practically going to be able to do that? Is that available at most people's facilities to be able to set that up appropriately as well? Like, I've done the whole barbell on the ground or using a rack.
A lot of people just skip it.
You can do it, but it's fucking annoying. And I partially kind of regret putting it into some of my programs because I love it as a movement so much, but I've got a really good machine for it to progress it. And I know most people don't. And in the past, when I didn't have that, when I was working in a commercial gym, I would just put up with the discomfort of having my knees on the floor and my feet anchored uncomfortably under a random piece of of machinery. That works, but that's me. And I know it's not practical nowadays. Like, it's just not. Ideally, yes, Nordic curl is king. Like, do that. But for the average person, it's like it's in a commercial gym.
It's badass, but hard to recommend in good conscience as an alternative to leg curls, unless someone really wants to emphasize calisthenics only and they refuse to do leg curls and don't have a good setup and they're training at home, then so be it, right? But what I find interesting is your recommendation of the chest supported row. So you're talking about the prime lever one that has the lengthened resistance profile with the diverging handles?
Yes, yeah.
Very simple machine. That's an expensive piece right there.
It is. I mean, honestly, like, even if you didn't have that piece, I think just having a very stable row or back exercise, chest supported row, chest supported pull down, or some sort of back exercise, I think is very helpful because it's hard to recreate that. I mean, you have a pull down, you have pull ups or whatever, barbell rows. They're all inherently a little bit more unstable, and it is harder to completely tax that same musculature because of the mismatch of resistance profile to strength curve on back specifically.
So then what are your thoughts on a landmine exercises, given the circular strength curve, which one could argue is more lengthened bias?
Yes.
And like, would you see T-bar rows being comparable to a prime rowing machine minus chest support?
Absolutely. A T-bar row, standing or with chest support, you have a machine for it in some gyms, which is more common. Great, fantastic option. The only downside I see to a standing T-bar, the old school T-bar row style, like without a machine, is the range of motion limitations, because the plate's going to hit the ground when you get strong. You can stand on a deficit. It's a bit more awkward, but you can do it that way.
Sure.
But again, I'll say, like, when I was coming up as a bodybuilder, some of my staple workouts was T-bar row, bar in a corner, plates on the bar, bang into my chest. I just go finger clasp grip like that, not even the handles.
Oh, even like that? Without the handle?
Purist. Yeah, I don't know why, honestly. It just felt better.
Wow.
It just felt good that way. But there are limitations there just in terms of the range of motion you could get out of it. By doing it single arm, Meadows row style could be fantastic.
Sure.
It's a great way. And it does overcome that situation of the limitation of the resistance profile. And it's stable enough. Like, as much as I say stability is king with having the
Absolutely.
as you said already about stability, it's not really an issue long term once you build that skill. Yeah. So I think it's a great option.
Yeah. And the metals row is kind of machine-like in a sense.
Yes.
Your arms are flared out. It's only moving one way.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't even compare it to a dumbbell row.
Yeah.
And you're getting more range of motion at the top as well. So you have a better resistance profile, and you don't have these big bulky dumbbells obstructing. And you can also have that knee support, or if you want, drag over a bench, and now you're all good, right? So I like that you mentioned that. I think that was the true benefit of the metals row that everyone overlooked, that it was actually more lengthened bias.
Yeah. I don't think even John really understood that. He was just like, it just feels good. And I was like, well, if we really look at it, and this is again, science explaining the bro science. John's like,
exactly,
man, this feels good. I had to do it. And it's like, well, here's why it works so good, because it's got enough freedom of motion to be customizable. It has stability. It has a good resistance profile. And that's why it feels so different in a good way for you based on what you've done so much with dumbbell and barbell rows. This is hitting that other aspect that you can't get normally.
So on the topic of lengthened biased resistance profiles, like what are some major free weight exercises that are lengthened biased that would replace some expensive machines?
Yeah.
That everyone could do.
The only ones that I think you need a machine for, or would be better with a machine, is back.
It's really back,
You're looking at legs, you're looking at chest, your bench press.
Also the delts, though?
Yeah, even delts, I'd say. You got dumbbell cable raises, they're fine. You know, lean on your side if you're doing a dumbbell raise for lengthened bias, lay on your side, or you could do just a cable raise as well. Settle up, lengthened bias. You don't need fancy equipment. And I say that because I've got fancy equipment here, but 99% of my training is cables and dumbbells and barbells. The only machine stuff that I do that's not cables, barbells, dumbbells would be maybe Smith machine press because it's comfortable, and it would be this primer over here. So the only ones we really need to be thinking about from a lengthened bias, what's the non-machine equivalent would be back. And that's where I'd say you have your pullovers, your stiff arm pullovers as well, the cable, and you have your Meadows / T-bar row style exercise where you have that landmine attachment. The other option as well is inverted rows, calisthenics, because it is lengthened bias.
It is.
And it's easier. People don't consider that.
You know what's interesting? How a lot of regression exercises in calisthenics have superior resistance profiles, and then they're immediately dismissed as beginner level. But if they were to just stick to that and add some load, or at least increase repetitions so they can still match the hypertrophic stimulus, then everything would be just fine. So I think that's something that we've overlooked. And maybe that does explain some of the development in these athletes who have strong opinions about these basic lifts, because they actually are optimal, quote unquote, and not that unstable, because the inverted row, you do have that foot contact and it's very machine-like, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's. I mean, if you can do it on rings, but if you did it on a barbell or whatever, it's very fixed. It's very stable. You know, like it's hard to mess it up. And you add a bit of weight on, weighted vest, you're good to go. You can get plenty of challenge out of that. I did that for my last training block. I was just doing inverted rows. I didn't even do the machine row. It was just inverted rows, my main row exercise. Enough weights in a plate vest, and it's challenging.
It's really cool. Even rack chins, you can say fit that criteria.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where, again, calisthenics underrated for this kind of stuff. Very, very underrated.
Absolutely. So I want to ask you more questions about calisthenics, but I feel like you already did that. I was going to basically ask you, how do you balance bodyweight exercises with traditional weight training? Like, is there a ratio, or you just go based off how you feel? Like, is it 2 free weight, 1 calisthenics? Because you do everything. You have your machines, your barbells, dumbbells. So is there like an order to it? Do you have a formula?
It is based
really
on
individualized.
Like I'll normally, if we're doing, looking at my programming from a template standpoint, there'll usually be 1 to 3 rows in a week. Usually it's 2. And then I'll just ask myself what rows I feel like doing from my repository of rows. Do I want to do dumbbell row? Do I want to do machine row? Do I want to do barbell row? Do I want to do a calisthenics-based row? A lot of the time I just pick at random. I just say, I'm going to do a barbell row, I'm going to do an inverted row for the next 12 weeks, just for funsies. And then when I get to a point where I'm like, you know what, they're no longer fun, I'm no longer progressing as well, I'm feeling like maybe from the gymnastic rings, my forearms are getting beat up from the false grip so much, or just having the grip intensive work, I need to switch to a machine row instead. And that's what then pushes me to the next movement. And then I'll say, okay, I've tapped out this machine row for so long, I feel like my erectors are getting weaker because so much chest support. So I need to add in more barbell rowing instead. So I'll switch that out. Like I noticed when I was a couple of years ago, I was very strong on the prime machine row. I hadn't done any direct like barbell row for a good couple of years. My lower back, my erectors as a whole, they were weak. I still got like big flaring lats, but the erectors noticeably shallower, and I was noticeably weak. And I was like, this is not good. Even though I'm doing my RDLs, heavy RDLs, it wasn't enough because it's,
Wow.
I'm not getting the same volume per week of just having that isometric strength from barbell rows, in my opinion. And maybe some of the loose, because I do quite loose golden era style barbell rows with a longer range of motion. So maybe because I'm neglecting that, my erectors started to shallow out quite a bit because I was biasing a lot of chest support.
Wow. So I'm guessing after that point, you would always mix in both?
Yeah.
Like you would never go back to just chest support?
Yeah. So now it's more balanced. Now it's, at least if it's not in the same training block where I'm doing one and the other, like a unsupported and a supported, it'll at least be switching every 12 to 16 weeks, switch from one focus to the other to create that balance. Yeah.
So then what are your thoughts on braced curls? Is that taking things too far, or could it have real benefits? Like, for example, the preacher curl, when you do look at the studies, it beats the incline curl. And some people have speculated that maybe it's because of the arm pad that's allowing you to put more force in. So like where do you apply stability for arm training, or like even with single arm work? Well, I've seen you do the overhead extensions with your arm on the cross post, but you do the same thing for biceps, or would you recommend it?
I do that 100%. So one thing I love doing is you got your preacher bench. I don't use it. I don't drape. I mean, I do the draped over preacher curl the way most people will do. That's in my rotation. But I go on the other side. I lay back on the preacher bench. So it becomes elbow support and back support. So you lay back on that incline and your arms are, so you're in an incline curl position. Exactly same as incline curl, but your upper arm is stabilized against the preacher bench. And it gives that lengthened challenge with stability, and it feels fantastic. So it's like Dr. Mark's supine curl, but with stability. And I mean, I believe Watson made a bench that was a standing incline bench, but it had adjustable elbow supports that would come out on the sides.
Prime released that bench as well recently.
Oh yeah, I think maybe it was Watson first, and then Prime have taken it as well. Yeah, but yeah, it's great idea.
Yeah, and even before that, Steve Reeves had welded a pipe behind his incline bench, and that's how he performed his.
I completely forgotten about that. That's true. Exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's cool to see that coming back up, or I've seen some guys cut up a piece of foam and then attach a band behind them, Yeah. And maybe that also explains the benefits of the arm blaster. Everyone thought it was a gimmick. But
Definitely. It's stability. And it will make a lot of sense to me as to why that would win over the incline curl. Also, you have more of a challenge in the lengthened position as opposed to incline curl where it just drops off completely. Yeah, I think stability is definitely a part of it. You're going to make gains on both. And that's the TikTokification saying, this exercise gives you 60% of the gains. This one gives you 100%. That's, BS.
No. Well, actually, having talked to Dr. Milo Wolf, we did a power building debate a couple months ago. He made the point that if an exercise is better, it's at most by like 10%. And this is coming from the man, Yeah. And that's what TikTok won't tell you. They'll make it seem like it's double the gains or 40, 50% more gains, but we're literally talking about marginal improvements here.
Honestly, even 10% sounds like a lot on paper. But when you really look at it and say, okay, what does that translate to millimeters extra grown? And 10% on your biceps is fucking tiny, especially when you span it out across 10 years. When you
spread it over, sure.
It's like you're not going to notice the difference. If you took my exact identical twin 10 years ago and he only did preacher curls versus incline curls, our arms would look very much the same.
Yeah. In the end, I feel like most naturals will end up in a similar spot. Just maybe the rate of progress could have been faster, but assuming, twins ran a reasonable program, that were similarly effective, then after 5-10 years, they'll be in basically the same spot. If there is a difference, they'll be able to notice it, but not the average person.
Yeah.
So I think that, again, adds credence to enjoying your training and having more variety overall.
100%. Like it's people forget the enjoyment side. And as I said before, people forget about the long game side of it, where it's like, no matter how good you've got an exceptional physique right now, Alex. In 20 years, no matter how good you train, it's not going to look the way it does now. Just aging. We can't defy that. You're going to lose some muscle.
Look better.
It's when the TRT starts, my friends. Yeah, we can't circumvent aging, but what we can do is like, hey, your biceps may not be the same amount of inches or the same amount of leanness in 20, 30 years, because there is no disputing the age factor of it. Even with TRT, there's changes in the way that the body develops, but the enjoyment side and your consistency and your longevity as a lifter and as a happy individual who enjoys training, gets as much as they can out of their training, the enjoyment side is such, and the variability side is such a overlooked factor.
Be just as high in many cases.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that you love this game just as much as when you began all those years ago. It might be the one thing in your life that has remained constant. Your goals have changed, your physique has evolved. Your life is not the same as it once was when you were that really young guy getting into this. But
100%.
you love every aspect of this game.
100%. I look at it so differently now because, and this is even a more recent revelation. I might not even be able to articulate the thoughts appropriately just yet, but, I achieved in some ways a dream physique in my early 20s, and I know like as someone who's been on, like I haven't progressed as, I don't look the way I did back then. Someone who's been on gear in the past as well, like when I was competing as a bodybuilder. So like, I know 100%, like I'm not on TRT now. I'm a completely 100%, I'm a natural athlete, all things considered, though I wouldn't claim that because of the history.
Natural, but you can't say lifetime natural.
But even then, I know 100%, I'm never going to look the way that I used to look, unless if I go on gear again. That's just is what it is. But I get so much more enjoyment out of my training now. And I thought if the end game was to look a certain way, I'd be so unhappy. But the body that I have, in the body I had back then, it's a side effect of what I enjoyed doing at the time. At the time back then, I didn't enjoy steroids. Like, it's not fun pinning yourself, but it is fun pushing your limits and pursuing the sport of very high level bodybuilding. That was a lot of fun for me. Now, pursuing that sport is not as fun. Pursuing improvement and training and variety is fun, which is why my body still looks exceptional, why I still, most importantly, get enjoyment and can be content with looking however I look, whether I'm 10% more body fat or less body fat, because I've been there in the past few years. I've been fluctuating a lot with my own just lifestyle, my own goals. I'm doing more running, more calisthenics, more everything else. I can still make peace with that despite looking very different, because the goal isn't the physique. The physique is the side effect. The goal is to enjoy my workouts and to be healthy and live the lifestyle that I enjoy. And the physique looks the way that it does, irrespective of it, as a side effect of the journey.
And now you're breaking limits in different ways, untapped
Exactly.
potential that's not just bodybuilding. That's what's so enjoyable about this process, right? It gave you another love for training, because you can only take it so far with bodybuilding. You got as big as you wanted to. You said you had your dream physique, but then it's like, what now, right? And you decided to downsize, prioritize health, and choose these other avenues. And you seem to be the happiest yet.
Absolutely. Like I can tell you, when I was in those bodybuilding years, and this is not what everybody else would experience, this is me personally, I was national level, like winning national titles. I was like, if I wanted to now, I'm at a crossroads. It's like, you can push a bit harder and go pro if you really want to. Like I have the potential to go pro, or you can just do something else. And I was like, what's that outlook look like? Am I really happy with where that trajectory is going for a pro lifestyle? I don't want that. I don't enjoy that. Things were at a point where I was like, business makes more sense. Work makes more sense. Traveling makes more sense. I want to do those things. And, I wasn't very happy in those final years of bodybuilding, which is, again, my personal thing, not everyone else's experience, but I didn't enjoy it as much. I was like, well, something's got to change.
So after you downsized and you decided to become a better coach and prioritize traveling and all these things you do now, did you experience body dysmorphia at all, like to an extent that it did bother you at some point? Or were you really cool with the transition because you made that choice not to take the next level? However you felt, were there challenges that came with the downsize? And if so, how did you manage them?
There were definitely times since like coming off and like getting smaller where I'd be like, fuck, man, why can't I look the way that I used to? Or like, where's my muscle going? Or I used to be able to do this, why can't I do this anymore in terms of lifts or whatever? But it never bothered me as much as I expected it would. And I think it is because it was a conscious choice. Like I said, I'm going to now prioritize my business and other things to focus on as well. I had more areas of my life that I knew had deficits in that I could then focus on and see growing. So that was very fulfilling for me. As long as something was going up, I was like, I'm happy. And I had other avenues of training to explore as well, like with other styles of training. I would say I experienced most body dysmorphia coming up in bodybuilding more than I did leaving it. Like they just created a lot of that, like just comparison of like, I'm not good enough, because part of it is the nature of the sport. And which is why, like when I told people about bodybuilding, they think I'm having a negative take on it. I was saying, no, just make sure you consider all variables here. Is you're entering into a sport or a lifestyle that necessitates comparison. And it necessitates putting yourself into a point of deficit saying, hey, you don't have big enough biceps. Your chest is lacking. And it's because it should be looking like this to be competitive on stage or to look better than this other person or whatever. And you've got to be very level-headed to be able to handle that objectively. Like that's where like a lot of the top pros, they've got that dialed in. Or they've got good support networks around that. Although a lot of pros don't as well. But a lot of the successful people, they've got a very healthy outlooks on it. Like say they know there's a shelf life on their peak physique, and it's for a sport of bodybuilding, and they're going to walk away from it and they're going to downsize. Look at a guy like even Kevin Levrone, like he would spend several months at a time in his peak condition where he was away from his peak condition. He'd stop everything because he knew that there's a season for things. A lot of people don't see it as seasonal, the physique. They think it's always going to be there. And then they start chasing that ideal. And I feel like I had that negative mindset when I was in bodybuilding. I was chasing the ideal, thinking I was going to have it for life. And then I started to realize, hang on, no, this is a seasonal thing. And do I want to be in the season anymore? I probably don't, because I've run my course of like where I want to be at with bodybuilding and I don't want to go pro. So let's change gears now. But there was a lot of inadequacy, a lot of comparison, a lot of not good enough that I dealt with as a bodybuilder. A lot of it's self-inflicted, but it's definitely amplified by the sport. Definitely amplified now by social media, even if you're not a competitive bodybuilder. And it can lead to questionable choices. Like, I said to you, like I've been on gear. I started very young. It's 2021. And I wouldn't recommend that. And it was not from peer pressure, it was self-imposed pressure on what I should look like. And I think I could have achieved more if I'd taken a little bit more time with it.
Right. And you ended up peaking quite early as a result.
Yeah, like it was 25 when I stopped. So it's like 4 years on gear or whatever.
That's very short.
Yeah. I loved it. I made rapid progress. It was incredible. But because I entered into it with the wrong mindset and I caught onto that quite early, I knew, okay, this is the wrong choice for me. I knew how to curb, thankfully, which is a very fortunate decision for myself. But a lot of people don't go through that same kind of journey.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. A lot of people, they're in their late 30s and they still refuse to get off, even if their health is getting worse.
Yeah.
And you were able to spot that on early and you got out of it. And now I wouldn't say you've hit your peak natty physique yet. You still got time. There will be a point, age will catch up to us eventually to a certain extent, although we'll always look amazing, right? But it's far delayed compared to being in hats. And I'm sure you're seeing that right now.
Definitely. It's been so interesting. Like this is the first year, this year, 2024, where I've actually been quite dialed in with my training and nutrition. The last few years, because the last few years I've been doing a lot of just business stuff and just like content creation, traveling, and haven't been able to have a consistent 12 months of just dialed in everything. And the progress I've made has been like, this is exceptional. Again, like comparing it to my bodybuilding days, hey, it's very different. But I know the rate of progression and like, this is actually exceptional for what I would have considered in the past. But it is the same thing of consistent training, track your macros, track your training, and hey, happy days,
Being natural, has your perspective on training changed at all? Because now everything has to be dialed in. It's 100% on you, and you see what the micro progression is all about. So like, what differences have you noticed? And where do you see yourself in, say, 5 or 10 years as your physique continues to get better?
That's a very tricky one to answer, because even when I was on gear, I was realistic about what was achievable. And I also knew just like, hey, gear's going to amplify things, but I've still got to dial everything as best as I could. A lot of my training now from the muscle building and the strength plyometric side, that was there when I was bodybuilding. The results came on much more rapidly back then than they do now. Things have to be dialed in regardless of gear or not. Yeah, like I said, like this is the first year for a long time that I've had everything dialed in, because the last 5 years I've been focused on business, relationships, family, other aspects of life. So I've been 50 to 80% there. Still able to achieve good results, but nothing like it the last year has been, where it's been like, holy fuck, okay, this is cool again. But I also know if I was on gear the last 5 years, the 50 to 80%, I'd have made even more progress. So it does definitely makes me appreciate the pure natural. But again, like I have appreciated that in the past. So it's a very tricky one to answer, Alex, because it's a very good question. I feel like if I thought on it more, there'd be a better answer I can give on this. But like, good. I've been around some of the absolute best pinnacle natural athletes, and I've been like, man, you guys have just got you've got it going on. You deserve to be this way. Like you've got everything dialed in, and you got the genetics, and you have the work ethic. You look the way you do for a very, very, very good reason.
Does that inspire you at all when you look at the top natural bodybuilding competitors, say in the WMBF?
It would have in the past, but it doesn't anymore.
Oh, yeah?
I can respect, like, my God, incredible physique. This is what hard work, consistency, work ethic, and genetics looks like when it's dialed into a T. Does that inspire me to work that little bit harder? Honestly, no, it doesn't. Because I know 100% that, and this is my own personal thing, I'm getting away from a lot of those comparisons because I know if I dialed everything in the same degree that they did, I would probably not look the way that they did still because of the genetic component and how impactful that is. And I'm realistic about that. And I could look even better potentially, or I could look very different in another way. So I say, okay, like, I respect what's possible. How does that really look for me though? Where am I in my season of life and my rates of progression?
I would ask you then, in this current season of life, what does inspire you to get better? Like, what is your primary motivation right now?
My primary motivation, if I had to pick one, is just to be more prepared for life. You know, I've got a daughter now, but even that doesn't come to the top of mind in terms of like my priority for training. Like, I want to set a good example for her. It's like, yeah, it's kind of there, but I can do any training for that. But it's like, I just want to make sure that I'm setting myself up as well as I can to be able to handle whatever I want to do in the future. Athletically, movement capacity wise, muscle strength wise, just being able to be capable as a human. Those are things that interest me. But I just like the idea of being physically able in every single capacity possible and not hyper focusing on one thing. That's kind of what motivates me when I see like, oh, I could jump higher in the future. I can get better at these jumps. I can get better. I can get more mobile. I can get to the splits one day. That's all exciting to me. But even those aren't motivations. It's just like, I like being able to show up each day and just push myself. I don't care what it's directed at. Today, I'm going to be pushing myself on front split training and some Bulgarian split squats. You know, in a couple of days' time, I'm going to be pushing myself on a run and doing some back workouts. I don't care about the muscle size or the strength size. I just care about pushing myself. And then whatever I'm interested in right now, that's what I'm going to push myself in. 2 years ago, I was pushing myself in business. That was my push. It wasn't training. So it's the
same mental focus, just being directed elsewhere.
Yeah.
And everything just comes along for the ride.
Exactly. So like right now I'm focused on in training specifically on so many different things, which is why it's kind of hard for me to answer it sometimes because it's not like, oh, I want to be the most muscular guy in the world.
It changes constantly.
It changes a lot, but I also know that I've got to keep some kind of consistency and like lack of change to be able to see the fruition of the progress that you make over time. You can't just keep changing shit all the time. Hope that answers the question.
It does. But I did want to know, where do you see your physique in the next 5 years?
In terms of size and strength, it'll look largely the same. It'll be 10% better than it is right now. I've got those good Asian genetics where like I'm going to stave off the aging to my physique for a longer period than some people may. But I think like I'm going to be 10% stronger, 10% more mobile, 10% better on 10% fitter. It's micro progressions.
Well, yeah. If I may cut you off, I would even speculate, well, maybe 10% bigger and 10% stronger, but the mobility and the athletic ability that you have is going to be far beyond that, because those are areas where you weren't as close to your self-imposed limit, quote unquote. Yeah,
that's true. I tend to agree with that. Like, it's only been the last couple of years I've been focusing on athletic cardiovascular training properly anyway. I think that's going to be something that's going to improve a lot. I don't think I'll ever get to a point where I want to be like an Alec Blennis doing an ultra marathon. I just don't see it ever happening. But I can see myself like getting fitter and more mobile beyond at a faster rate than strength and muscle mass.
It sounds to me like you're really being the jack of all trades, which I love. But I want to know, with all this, Eugene, how do you balance it in a way that you're avoiding burnout? Because especially managing this business and also improving your fitness goals, it's a lot to take on. And you do have a large following, and people look up to you, and I'm sure there must be certain pressures. Do you ever feel that a little bit? And if so, how do you deal with it?
Certain pressures, like to look a certain way, for example?
To constantly be better in a way that maybe your audience would be like, wow, Eugene is always leveling up. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. Okay. So couple of things on that. For my audience or anybody, even like anybody who sees my stuff on social media, early days, body dysmorphic days, I thought people only respect me if I look a certain way, if I look super fucking jacked and shredded all the time. One subpoint to that is the best way to look 20 pounds heavier is probably to lose 10 pounds of body fat. And you'll look significantly more jacked, especially considering like our audience, 99% of it is online. You got the right lens, you got the right lighting, you look fucking jacked. Exactly right. You know, like, people always look at me when they're in person, like, wow, you're smaller than I thought you were. And I'm like, that's great. That's cool. Like, I don't care about that. Like, that's kind of intentional. It's like, as long as I look a certain level of condition, I can look at the part to be able to say I know enough and to be able to like have proof in the pudding. Like, I walk the walk. But what I realized, I'm not exactly sure when, but people don't necessarily connect. People will engage with the shredded, jacked physique. That will pull eyeballs onto you. But what builds a connected audience is the story you tell around it. You know, they care about your process as the conjugate athlete over the last 10 years. You're incorporating rack pulls again. It's been 10 long years since you talk about them. That's fucking cool, man. Like, I'm here for that. Yes, the physique got me to pay attention in the first place and got my attention, but what kept me around and made me, from a business perspective, a customer, an engaged person, someone who's going to grow your brand, it's you and your personality. I've been through so many transformations, as jacked, as small, as fat, as fit, as everything in between. And the one thing that maintained my brand more than anything was just the way I told those stories and those lessons. And said, hey, like, I've gotten really fat, I've gotten really small, I've lost this strength, I got injured. If anything, it humanizes you to the audience and it gives you confidence to tell your story and more authentically, and that just begets more and more authenticity from your audience as well. So you're like the old Eugene 10 years ago was all about like, I got to look the part all the time. And then, you know, the new me is like, well, looking the part, just be a bit leaner and you're cool. But more importantly is just sharing authentically about what you're going through.
The authentic process, seeing your evolution. It's not about the numbers that you have or how jacked you are. It's maybe even your enthusiasm, excitement leading up to that point, the fact that you were growing together with the people who saw you come up. And they almost see you like a big brother of sorts. Like the parasocial is being strengthened. And I think we also see that with the rise of guys like Sam Solik, you know, because his audience, everyone realizes that they're not going to be as big as him, but they kind of see him as someone of a similar age where they're going to the gym together. Like he's reeling you in when he's taking you for his car rides and vlogging it out. And I think that's been the true secret all along, because even in myself, Eugene, you can say that my production quality wasn't the best back in the day. It's really only the last 3 or so years where I've taken things up a notch. Yet I still amassed this decent following. And I think it's because I was expressing my authentic self, and it attracted a lot of people who I've always felt similar things, but didn't have anyone to connect to about it, right? So
100%.
It sounds like you realize that, and that's what makes you so cool with all this stuff.
And I appreciate that. I mean, I think if we were to analyze you from a content perspective, it's like you are breaking all the rules. You're not doing this super fast-paced scripted content. You're not doing a lot of clickbait. You're not doing a lot of like all the content creation must-dos, but you're doing exceptionally well, because irrespective of that, it's very authentic and it builds the brand. The goal isn't to get clicks. The goal isn't to get engagement. The goal is to build a brand and a business. And the only way to do that is through personality and sharing you yourself. You know, if you did a Mr. Beastified kind of piece of content, yeah, it may get more clicks and views, but it's not you. People wouldn't connect with it and you'd be disposable.
Yeah. And the moment you stop producing that kind of content, those guys are going to leave right away.
Exactly.
And you see that with bodybuilding. When you unlock your peak physique, that you'll get some eyeballs on you temporarily, but then those guys leave when you decide to pursue your own goals, right? But your own goals, the ones that you're excited about, your real audience will see that and they'll want to stick around for the ride. So all you really did was cut out the people who weren't serious, and understanding that you don't need to take on everybody, but those who are going to grow with you in the long term. You know, you have a good reputation, you're not screwing anybody over, the word of mouth just keeps improving. That's what this is all about. And I think 100%. What we get off to is being the best educators we can be.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to share that. You know, I still think it's so cool that you made burpees cool, man.
Hey, you know,
burpees a cool thing. You got me doing burpees as my conditioning, you know?
Wow.
When I can't be bothered going outside, or it's too cold, or I don't want to get on the treadmill, like, I'll just do burpees. I can do it anywhere. I can do it outside. It's fine. Great.
That's really cool to hear. But you see how it all trickles down? Burpees, they gained popularity in 2020. So I started doing them for that reason. And I realized it was so effective that I just never took them out of my routine. And then I shared that with my audience. And then I didn't even know that you were inspired by that as well. That's awesome.
Man, it's brilliant, you know, because there's so many times where I want to do cardio, but I don't want to go outside, or I want to do cardio outside, but I don't have any outdoor equipment. So I'm like, I'll just fucking do burpees and I'll just do a 30, 50 down workout or whatever. Like I had no idea what a 30 down workout was. And I was like, these are cool things. And
how do you like those down workouts?
They're fucking brutal. And like, there are so many people who could have told me about those workouts. So many other creators. I could have found it on Instagram somewhere. But the fact that it came from you and your personality and your selling of it in a very very passionate way is like, that connects with me. Well, it connected everybody, but it connected with me and got me to do it. And that's more important than anything else. It's about that story and it's not because you look a certain way, it's because of who you are. That's what got me on board with it.
That really means a lot, Eugene. Thank you so much. And I feel the same way about your content. On that note, because I don't want to end up in a rabbit hole of passion here, because I had one final question for you, but it kind of is connected to this. But I want to know if you can go back in time, and you probably know where I'm going with this, what advice would you give to your younger self? And for my younger audience, what would your final message be to this newer generation of lifters who are confused, who feel all this pressure, and who are trying to fulfill the body of their dreams, but they're being discouraged by certain fitness influencers who lower their standards?
These are going to be cliches, but it's kind of the thing, isn't it? Like, cliches are cliches for a reason, and it's patience. Like, I would tell my younger self, be a lot more patient and just take your time. Not with respect to like, even like steroid use or whatever. I don't care about that. It's more just about like, be patient with considering and taking, and like really when you get information, dissect it, understand it, try to think, where does it fit into your world? And how do you apply that? Maybe don't apply it straight away. Are you at that level yet? Like you and me, we're talking about, certain techniques about lifting or whatever. Be patient. Maybe you're not ready for that just yet. Our push down band technique thing. Hey, you know what? If you're not pressing that much weight, this is irrelevant to you. Be patient. Don't jump the gun and start trying to do all this fancy stuff when you don't need it just yet. Take your time with these things. It's such a big cliche, but honestly, like, there are so many cliches out there. Like I'm thinking about this the other day. Everybody says, hey, enjoy your teenage years because they're the best years of your life. And when you're a kid, you're a teenager, like, shut the fuck up, boomer. I don't give a shit what you say. But hey, looking back now, those teenage years are probably some of the best years of your life. You wouldn't necessarily want to go back immediately, but there were some big impactful things that you're like, man, I wish I took my time to enjoy that more. There's a reason why people say those cliches, because they're fucking true. Patience is a big one. Taking the time to be as level-headed as you can with, approaching an argument or pieces of content from as many different views as possible, trying to understand it deeply is really underrated. And I think that actually helps a lot with the comparisons. So when you see somebody who can achieve so much more than you, like you and I, we're similar kind of age. And I'm like, well, hey, how the fuck can you do a 4 or 5 bench press and I'm a 225? Like I can compare myself to that. Or I can take the consideration saying, why can you do that? How can you do that? What's actually happened? Now I can accept why I can't do a 4 or 5 bench press. Because I took the time to consider why you can versus me can't, or whatever, in good English. I think we need to get a lot better at accepting ourselves for the good and the bad. Like I accept that I can't do a 3-plate bench press at the moment. I have in the past, but it's like, I know I can't. But I also accept that I've been able to build my brand and my business to a level that I wouldn't have been able to do with a 3-plate bench press. It would have gotten in the way.
Sometimes it's sacrifice. You got to trade one goal for another.
Exactly right. And for the youth, when comparison levels are so high, especially on social media, taking the time to accept yourself and to connect with who you are, who do you want to be, what are you currently doing, are you on the right path for that, will help steer people away from the comparison all the time. Because then you can compare and you can say, yeah, Alex has achieved more than I am. I'm worthless compared to him. But then accept, why is that the case? And what does that really mean for you and where you're at right now?
When you see someone who's doing impressive things, don't be discouraged by it. Ask, what can you learn from that person? Could you get close? Could you match it? Could you do better? Instead of, I'm not going to get there because this is so extreme.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. That was a beautiful message. And on that note, I think that about wraps up this amazing episode. So thank you so much.
I appreciate
Thanks for being on. And the pleasure is all mine. You covered everything that I wanted to ask you. Really good back and forth. And on that note, if people want to learn more about you, where can they do so?
So just go on YouTube, start on my YouTube, and they can go where they want after that. If they enjoy it, they'll enjoy the rest of the content. Yeah.
YouTube it is. Well, I'll be sure to provide that link in the description box. And with that said, we are done. Thanks again
Thank
for
you.
being with me today.
Take care, man.
Take care.